Hello, my dear friend of sleepy history, wherever you are tonight, whatever your heart carries. I'm so glad you're here. Take a breath. Let the weight of the world fall gently from your shoulders. This moment is just for you. In this quiet place, we don't rush or worry. We drift through ancient forests, silent seas, and skies untouched by time. Each story we tell is more than memory. It's a lullaby of the earth, a reminder that even the planet has healed again and again. So come walk softly with me through time. Let the past hold you and the night carry you gently to sleep. And if you feel a little more at peace, leave a good night wish in the comments, one that no one else has written, just yours, just for someone who needs it. Now, let us begin. Part 1. Plants begin to emerge on land. The first wave, brave algae leaving the sea. Close your eyes and step softly into the past. For 143 million years ago, Earth was still learning how to breathe. There were no trees yet. No green, no birds, no flowers. Only the great ocean, murmuring to itself in blue silence. The land was bare and sunburnt, quiet as a thought not yet spoken. It waited, and somewhere, in the gentle hush between sea and stone, life stirred. Along the tidal edges, where salt water kissed warm rock, lived soft green algae. They drifted in the shallows, warmed by sunlight, swaying with the rhythms of the tide, simple, weightless, patient. But sometimes the ocean pulled away and left a few behind. They did not plan to stay. They were not strong, but they clung, not to conquer the land, but simply to hold on. The air was dry, and the sun was harsh, yet some algae curled into cracks, slowed their breath, and endured. In their stillness, something quietly shifted. They were the first to cross the threshold from water to land. They did not know that by staying, they were opening a new chapter of life. They did not know that one day, forests would rise from their legacy. But with each rootless thread holding firm to stone, they began a revolution. A green one. And maybe that's how all true change begins, not with force, but with fragile persistence. Not with certainty, but with a quiet decision to stay, even when the ground feels unfamiliar. Mosses, the first settlers on land. Time passed softly, as it always does in the deep chapters of Earth's memory. And from those brave algae, something new began to grow. They were small. So small you could walk right past and never notice. But these early mosses were quiet miracles. Delicate green mats that spread gently across rock and soil. No roots, no stems, but they reached out, slowly, to touch the land with softness. Mosses did not rush. They had no need to. Their gift was patience. To lie still through heat and dryness. To drink in morning dew, to rest where no other life had yet dared to linger. They clung close to the ground, building the first thin layers of soil. They softened the hardness of stone. They trapped water, held it like a whisper, and shared it with the earth beneath. And the land responded. With moss came the first sense of green permanence, a color that didn't flee with the tide, but stayed quietly alive. The mosses prepared the way, not through force, but through presence. Through being there, they did not conquer, they cared. And in their caring, the land began to change. If you've ever felt too small to matter, remember them, the soft green ones, unseen but essential. They remind us that it is often the gentlest presence, the quietest kindness, that lays the foundation for everything yet to come. Structures against desiccation, surviving dryness. The land was not a gentle place. Unlike the sea, where water embraced every surface, the open air offered no shelter. Every drop of moisture could vanish in the sun. Every breeze could steal what little water life had. To remain on land, mosses needed more than courage. They needed protection, ways to guard the water within their bodies. So slowly, gently, they began to change. Their outer layers thickened, waxy and subtle, wrapping their fragile cells like a soft skin. This was their shield, a cuticle, like a thin veil that slowed the dry wind's grasp. Inside, they evolved to close themselves off, to pause life until the rain returned. A stillness of survival. They didn't grow tall. They didn't need to. Instead, they grew wide and low, letting each droplet of water pass from one to another. A community of care. Even without true roots, they clung with tiny filaments, anchoring themselves to stone and soil. Every detail of their structure whispered of survival, not through aggression, but through grace. And so mosses endured. In a world where water was scarce, they became masters of stillness, of waiting, of holding on. Like them, we too build quiet defenses, soft layers against dryness, ways to survive what would otherwise wither us. And in that, there is no weakness, only wisdom, written in green, the earliest photosynthesis on land, breathing light into stone. For the first time, sunlight touched life on land, not just with warmth, but with meaning. The algae and mosses that clung to stone brought a gift with them from the sea, the ability to turn light into life. Photosynthesis, quiet, invisible, sacred. On land, this process became something new. With no waves to filter the sun, the light came unsoftened, direct. It was stronger, harsher, but also more generous. And the mosses adapted. They opened tiny pores to sip in carbon dioxide from the air. Within their cells, ancient green chloroplasts captured the sun's energy and turned it into sugar, breath, and growth. Oxygen was the byproduct, a quiet release with every ray of light into air that had never known such a thing before. In this way, mosses helped awaken the sky. They offered a breath to a breathless land. They made the invisible visible, one slow exhale at a time. They were not just survivors, they were givers. Sometimes just by being who we are, steady, still, and alive, we change the world around us without even knowing. Bonds between land and water, moss as a bridge. Moss never truly left the water. It carried the ocean within itself. In every cell, every damp breath, every longing for dew. Though it lived on stone, moss was still part of the tide. It soaked up rain like memory. It gathered mist like prayer. And in this way, it became a bridge between sea and soil, between the world that was and the world to come. Streams trickled where moss grew. Water clung where none had stayed before. Lakes formed in places that had once been bare. Even the landscape began to shift in response. Moss slowed the rush of water, softened erosion, and held the very ground in place. What had once been mere rock now started to become soil. This was more than survival. This was transformation. Moss taught Earth how to hold water, how to cradle life, how to begin again. And perhaps we, too, carry within us a little of that memory. A tide that still moves through our quietest parts, reminding us that we can belong to more than one place at once. A world just beginning, the soil awakens. With moss came something new, the beginning of Earth's skin. Before this moment, the land had only worn stone, cold, cracked, and still. But where moss rested, soil began to form. Tiny grains held together by organic touch, minerals kissed by decay. a surface that could remember what had fallen and offer it back as life. Soil is memory made visible. It is the ground that holds both death and seed, loss and potential. Moss, though small and rootless, helped write the first layer of that story. It broke stone, caught dust, it held moisture, and from this quiet work, the first living ground was born. This new soil was shallow, but it was enough. Enough to welcome other pioneers. Enough to begin building ecosystems. Enough to invite the forest someday. And so, Earth was no longer just a planet of oceans. It had begun to wear green and brown, to grow a skin, to cradle life close. And maybe, like Earth, we too need time to form our own soil, to soften, to hold what has passed, and to become a place where something new might grow. 2. The emergence of vascular plants, when life learned to reach upward. When the ground became too small, the limits of moss. The earth was changing. The winds of the Silurian blew gently over land no longer barren. Soft mosses spread like whispers over rock, drawing breath and moisture where none had stayed before. But even this new life, beautiful and brave, had its limits. Mosses could not grow tall. They had no roots to anchor deeply, no vessels to move water upward. Every part of them depended on the nearness of dampness, on rain that kissed the surface, on fog that wrapped the ground. When the days grew warmer and drier, even the moss began to struggle. The land was asking for more, for something that could reach, gather, and rise. The sun, once a comfort, became a challenge. Light poured down generously, but only for those who could stand in it. The moss remained low, unable to climb into the brightness above. It was time for a new kind of life to appear. A life that could hold water within itself, transport nutrients from root to tip, and stand upright to face the sky. It began slowly, quietly, but from that stillness, the first vascular plants were born, not in height or grandeur, but in possibility. They were the first to say, "We will not wait for the world to be gentle. We will build a way to survive within it." The first inner rivers, vascular tissues, are born. Inside the bodies of these early plants, a new kind of miracle was unfolding, one that would change the history of life forever. For the first time, plants had begun to form inner vessels. These weren't just hollow spaces. They were finely structured channels with a purpose, to move life itself. They became known as xylem and phloem. Xylem carried water and minerals upward, from the damp soil to the farthest growing tips. Like a breath rising through a narrow pipe, it gave the plant the power to grow higher than ever before. Phloem, meanwhile, moved sugars and nutrients from the leaves to the rest of the plant, even down to the roots below. It was a reverse flow, a balancing act of nourishment. Together, these tissues created an inner river system, a silent current flowing within every stem. They allowed plants to live in places that were no longer constantly wet, to transport food and water across distances too far for moss or algae to reach. This was the moment plants truly became land dwellers, not just resting on the surface, but rooted, growing, moving from the inside. The earth had never seen anything like it, and though no one would have noticed at first, no explosion of color, no towering trees, this quiet change laid the groundwork for forests, flowers, and everything to come. Sometimes, it is the invisible currents within us that carry us forward. Sometimes, strength begins where no eye can see. Storing water, holding strength, internal reserves emerge. To thrive on land meant more than reaching upward. It meant learning to endure thirst. The earliest vascular plants began to change not just on the outside, but deep within. They developed tissues that could store water, not just absorb it, but hold it close for the dry hours. Soft inner cells became like small reservoirs. Moisture collected in quiet chambers beneath their skin. Around their bodies, waxy coatings began to form. This new layer, called a cuticle, helped keep the precious water from escaping into the sunlit air. The plant was beginning to seal itself, not to shut the world out, but to protect what it carried inside. Some developed tiny pores or stomata that opened only when the air was soft and cool, and closed during the hottest part of the day. It was a delicate dance, breathing just enough but never too much. These were no longer passive green beings. They were planners, protectors, carriers of strength. With each adaptation, they became more resilient, able to survive dry spells, brave new soils, and explore lands that mosses could never dare to touch. And in this evolution, there is a lesson for us too, to hold on to what nourishes, to build reserves for the difficult days, to keep a softness inside even when the world outside grows harsh. What lives longest is not always the tallest, but that which knows how to keep its strength. Reaching toward the sky, the first vertical growth. With strength beneath the surface and rivers flowing inside, the plants began to rise. They didn't leap toward the sun. They grew slowly, gently, but with direction, upward. New tissues called lignin began to appear in their stems. These strengthened their structure, making them firmer, more upright. No longer soft and sprawling like moss, they stood short at first but determined. A few centimeters became a few inches. It was not much, but it was enough. Enough to feel the warmth of sunlight before it touched the ground. Enough to reach above the dew line. Enough to be noticed. These first upright plants began to cast shade for the very first time in Earth's history. The land was no longer a flat plane of light. It had depth now, layers, light above, shadows below. And in those shadows, cooler air lingered. Moisture held a little longer. The beginnings of microclimates were forming, not because of wind or mountains, but because of plants. This was a new way of living, to rise not just to survive, but to create space for others. To grow vertically was not just about competition for sunlight. It was also an invitation to future forms of life that would find shelter beneath their stems. And perhaps, like them, we too rise not to stand alone, but to become a canopy where others can rest. The quiet pioneers, first species of vascular plants. They were not flashy. They had no blossoms, no bright green leaves, no soaring trunks. But in their silence, they changed the world. The earliest known vascular plants appeared in the mid-Silurian, and their names now echo through time. Cooksonia, Rhynia, Zostrophyllum. Cooksonia was tiny, no more than a few centimeters tall. It had no true roots or leaves, yet it possessed the defining gift of xylem, a vascular system. It was, in many ways, the prototype of all higher plants to come. Rhynia, slightly younger, lived near ancient hot springs. Its stem branched like a delicate tree. Inside, water moved through fine channels, feeding every part. Its structure hinted at complexity, a future not yet born, but already imagined. These were not forests. They were suggestions, sketches. But in them, the future took root. They laid the groundwork for all the plant diversity that would follow, from ferns to trees, from mossy wetlands to alpine slopes. They began the slow weaving of ecosystems with height, shade, and shelter. And when they fell, they didn't disappear. Their bodies broke down, returned to the soil, enriching it. They formed some of the earliest layers of organic earth, soil that could hold seeds, support roots, and cradle the next generation. In their gentle way, they open the land to life. Great change rarely arrives with noise. Sometimes it comes in the form of a simple green stem. Steady, a new chapter for the land, lungs, and layers form. With vascular plants rising and spreading, Earth began to breathe differently. These new plants pulled in carbon dioxide through their pores and released oxygen back into the atmosphere. Slowly, almost invisibly, the air itself changed. Each plant, no matter how small, added a thread to the fabric of breathable sky. And when these plants died, they didn't vanish. Their remains layered upon the ground, mixing with minerals and forming soil, real, rich soil. Not just dust or silt, but earth that could support life, that could hold water, that could remember. The surface of the land was transforming. It was no longer just rock and moss. It had layers, depth, warmth. It had begun to hold history. More than that, it had begun to welcome. In the shelter of these new layers, tiny creatures would one day crawl. Seeds would take hold. The rhythm of life would expand. What began as a quiet act of internal flow, the birth of vascular tissue, had now shaped the world itself. A planet that once only hosted life in water was becoming a living, breathing land. And so the chapter closed, not with an ending, but with an opening. The earth was ready for forests, ready for animals to walk beside the plants, ready for the sky to turn green with growth. And all of it began here with the first plants that learned how to carry life upward. 3. Impact on ecosystems. When plants don't just live, they help other living things live too. Holding the ground, roots that protected the soil. Let the day drift away. Let your breath grow soft. Now imagine a time long ago when the earth was still learning how to hold itself together. Before plants had roots, the land was fragile. Rain would wash away the soil. Wind lifted dust into the sky. The ground was always changing, never still, like a restless breath. But then early plants grew roots. Not deep, not strong, but enough. The roots wrapped gently around tiny rocks and grains of sand. They held the soil in place. Even heavy rain couldn't carry it away so easily anymore. Even soft winds could not break it apart. Riverbanks stopped crumbling. Small hills stood longer. The earth began to settle. These little roots didn't seem powerful, but they gave something new. Stability. A place where life could stay. A place where the land didn't need to run or fall apart anymore. Thanks to them, plants could grow in the same spot for longer. And slowly, the surface of the earth started to build something more than just dust. Sometimes, all it takes is a gentle grip, a quiet connection. Just holding on, calmly, patiently, can be enough to make everything steadier. And maybe, in our lives too, there are moments when we don't need to be strong or loud, we just need to stay, to root, to be present, and that alone can be healing. Calming the shores, plants near water bring balance. Now imagine the edge of a quiet lake. The water laps gently. The light is soft. But long ago, it wasn't so calm. In the early Silurian, lakes and rivers were wild. Rain came and water surged forward. The banks of streams broke apart easily. One day there was a pond, the next it was gone. But then small plants started growing at the edges. Their roots held onto the soft mud. Their stems stood in the shallow water. And slowly things began to change. These plants stopped the water from rushing. They caught the soil before it was swept away. They made the bank stronger, steadier, safer. When rain came, they soaked up extra water. When drought came, they helped hold on to moisture. This balance created the first stable shoreline. In these calm places, other life could come. Small creatures could rest, seeds could settle, and maybe, in our own lives, we also need gentle edges, quiet boundaries that help us hold steady when things feel stormy, safe spaces where we, too, can come ashore and breathe, creating soil, the gift of falling leaves. Close your eyes and imagine the ground beneath you, soft, dark, warm. But once, that ground was nothing but cold rock and dust. Early plants lived short lives. They grew, reached up to the light, and then they fell. Leaves dropped, stems dried, bodies faded. But they didn't disappear. They stayed. They broke down slowly. They became something new, the first layers of real soil. This soil was different from dust. It held moisture, stayed warm. It gave young plants a better chance. And beneath the surface, tiny fungi and future soil creatures began to thrive. With every season, the soil grew richer, not from power, but from the quiet cycle of giving back. One leaf fell, another plant grew. Nothing was wasted, and maybe we don't need to last forever to matter. What we leave behind, our care, our kindness, even our quiet efforts, can become soft ground for someone else's beginning. A place to hide shade and shelter for small creatures. The midday sun was hot. The wind blew dry. The land had no cover, no comfort, until the plants grew taller. As vascular plants reached upward, something changed below. They cast shadows. They blocked the wind. They made small patches of cool, quiet ground. And in those patches, something beautiful began. Tiny creatures found shelter. Insects, arthropods, even early worms. They hid beneath leaves, between roots, under fallen branches. For the first time, land had safe places, not just for plants, but for all who needed to rest. The plants didn't build walls. They didn't guard the ground. But by simply growing, they made a home. And maybe that's what we do too. Just by being ourselves, soft, steady, present, we create shelter. For friends, for family, for those we don't even know are watching. And that quiet safety, that's a kind of love. Food for the first land animals. Now picture a quiet morning. A leaf catches the sunlight. A small creature crawls toward it. For the first time, land offers a meal. Before this, animals had to live in water. There was nothing to eat on land, only rocks and dust. But now, with plants growing everywhere, that changed. Their stems were soft. Their leaves were full of sugar and water. Even their fallen parts could feed tiny creatures. Early animals, maybe millipedes or small insects, began to nibble. Not much, just a bite here, a bite there. But it was enough. A new food chain had begun. Plants gave life not just to themselves but to others. They didn't run. They didn't fight. They simply shared what they had grown from sunlight. And maybe we don't need to do big things to help others. Sometimes just sharing what we already have, our warmth, our time, our care, is enough to nourish a whole world around us. Part 2. Vertebrates take over lakes and rivers. 1. Primitive jawfish. A new kind of bite, the birth of the jaw. Breathe gently now. Let the ripples of time take you back. The water was calm. Fish moved slowly. They had no jaws, just soft, round mouths like little open tubes. They could only suck in tiny bits of food floating by. No biting, no chewing, just drifting and hoping. But deep inside one fish, something shifted. At the sides of its throat were two bones, part of its gill system used only for breathing. Slowly, over many generations, those bones moved forward. They curled inward, and they began to work like a pair of moving doors. And just like that, the first jaw appeared. It wasn't strong yet, couldn't chew much, but it could grab. For the first time, a fish could hold its food. It didn't have to wait for food to float by. That small change opened a new path. Fish began to explore more, to hunt, to choose what and when to eat. The ocean grew more alive, more full of motion and purpose. The silence broke. A quiet tension filled the water, one creature beginning to take, while another tried to flee. And it all began with just two bones, quietly learning to move. And maybe, in our own lives, small shifts matter too. The moment you stopped waiting for life to float to you and gently reached out. You didn't need to be perfect, just brave enough to open your own small doors. The power to hunt when fish learned to decide. Now that jaws had formed, fish began to see the world with new purpose. No longer bound to wait for food to drift into their mouths, they could now move, aim, and choose. A flicker in the water was no longer just a shape, it was a possibility. Slowly, a quiet intelligence emerged in the way they swam. Some fish started hiding behind rocks or plants, lying still with patience. Others darted through the water like quicksilver, using bursts of speed to surprise their prey. The jaw didn't just offer strength, it gave control. And control brought decisions. Over time, their bodies adapted to this new behavior. Sleek forms replaced clumsy shapes. Eyes moved to the sides, then forward, sharpening their depth perception. Fins shifted for better steering. Muscles thickened. Every feature was shaped by the rhythm of chasing and catching. For the first time, the underwater world had hunters that thought before they struck. But predators weren't the only ones evolving. Prey too became wiser. Some grew flatter to hide in the sand. Others moved in swarms to confuse attackers. Life became more alert, more reactive, more aware. The food web grew dynamic and layered, held together by the push and pull of decision-making. Beneath the surface, a quiet dance of intention had begun. One where every movement, no matter how small, was chosen. And maybe that's how we grow too, not just through strength, but through the quiet courage to decide when to reach forward and when to wait. Below the surface, the first jawed fish groups. The sea was quiet, but not still. Deep beneath the surface, change moved gently. The first jawed fish had arrived, and soon they began to take many forms. Some wore plates of bone, like soft armor pressed over their heads and bodies. These were the placoderms, slow, heavy, but safe. They didn't swim far. They waited motionless, in the calm shadows of the seafloor. And when a smaller creature came close, they opened their jaws, quick and sudden, like the snap of a thought. Others were lighter, the acanthodians, their bodies slender, their fins lined with soft spines. They moved easily, weaving through the water like leaves caught in a breeze. They didn't hide. They wandered, hunted gently, quietly. No two fish looked quite the same. Some had wide mouths, some had sharp noses, some curled their bodies, some swam straight. The sea had become a gallery of possibility, each shape, a new way of living. And maybe that's how we are too. We don't all move the same. We don't all grow in the same direction. But there's a quiet kind of beauty in becoming who you were meant to be, softly, in your own shape, in your own rhythm. Breathing and sensing, sharpening awareness. As life in the sea became more active, the fish began to change from the inside. With jaws came movement, chasing, gliding, exploring. But movement needs energy, and energy needs air. So slowly, gently, the body made room for more breath. Gills grew better at drawing oxygen from water. In some quiet, shallow pools, where the water was still and warm. A few fish formed something new. Small sacs inside their bodies, a place to hold air, to breathe when the water could not give enough. These were the first whispers of lungs. But breath wasn't all they needed. To move with purpose, they had to sense. Eyes became clearer. Some could see shadows from far away. Their skin began to feel tiny vibrations. And a few began to sense what others could not, the faint electric beat of life around them, the soft hum of the sea, of others moving nearby. They weren't just swimming anymore. They were listening. They were learning. And maybe in our own lives, that's how we grow. Not just by pushing harder, but by feeling more deeply. The world speaks to us softly, through moments, through stillness. And if we learn to listen, we move with more care, with more peace. The hidden arms race, prey responds. As some fish became hunters, others began to protect themselves. The balance of life was shifting, but gently, like a tide rising under moonlight. Soft-bodied creatures, once drifting freely, began to grow quiet defenses. Their shells became thicker. Some turned hard like stone. Others grew small spines, just enough to say, "Not me." Some creatures didn't grow tougher. They grew wiser. They learned to hide, sinking into the sand, wrapping themselves in stillness. Others moved in sudden patterns, twisting, spinning, hard to catch. Even the tiniest plankton began to change, floating in ways that helped them drift out of reach. And the hunters, too, adapted. They became more patient, more careful, more aware. The sea was no longer just a place of motion. It had become a web of attention, of knowing when to wait, when to flee, when to strike. And maybe that's what balance looks like. In our lives, we meet challenge and we adjust. We learn new rhythms. We protect ourselves in quiet ways. Growth doesn't always shout. Sometimes it curls inward like a shell, soft on the inside, strong where it counts. A legacy beneath the water. The first jawed fish are long gone, but they haven't vanished. Their shapes remain in stone. A curved plate here, a fossilized jaw there, held quietly in ancient rock. These are more than remnants. They are memories, the soft echo of a time when fish first began to choose. Their jaws led to more than bites. They led to bones. Little by little, their skeletons became firmer, more solid. Stronger spines, more stable bodies. These tiny changes would one day allow creatures to rise, to walk, to breathe on land. But for now, they still swam slow, thoughtful, aware. They were the first to chase, the first to notice, the first to breathe a little deeper. Beneath the waves, they carried the seeds of all future life. And maybe, deep inside us, that memory remains. A part of us that still listens, still waits, still dares to change shape when it's time. We are all made of quiet beginnings. And even now, we carry the courage to move forward, gently, one breath at a time. 2. Expansion into new habitats. Where the river meets the sea, a new path begins. The tide whispered in and out, like a soft breath drawn through ancient reeds. Along the coast of the Silurian world, where the ocean gently kissed the mouths of rivers, something quiet began to shift. This was a place of meeting, where salt water faded into sweet, where waves slowed and sunlight filtered through mist and mud. The estuary, a borderland without walls, soft as sleep. Here some fish began to pause. Jawed fish, born of the sea, wandered slowly into this blurred world of shadows and changing taste. Not far, just a little upstream, just enough to feel something different. The water here was quieter, cooler in shade, warmer in shallows. Floating plants swayed above muddy beds. New prey stirred beneath roots and stones. But the waters were not the same. The salt was lighter, and their bodies had to learn. Cells adapted, gills shifted, internal rhythms changed, not by force but by time, by patience. And so, breath by breath, they stayed longer, swam deeper, not in rebellion but in curiosity. They were no longer only of the sea. They were visitors at first, then dwellers, then pioneers. We too begin again at the edges, not with leaps, but with quiet questions. And often it's in the spaces between not fully one thing or another that we become something new. Into the fresh, the first steps inland. Farther from the sea, the rivers grew clearer, quieter, no longer mixed with salt. The waters ran with the softness of rain, cool, clean, and unfamiliar. It was here, in these pure streams and shaded shallows, that a few bold fish continued their silent journey. They were not built for this, not yet. The minerals in the water were different. The light fell differently through the trees. Food didn't drift by as easily, but still something in them pressed forward. These fish began to change. Their bodies, shaped by tides, learned the rhythm of the current. Their kidneys worked harder, filtering fresh water that threatened to swell their cells. Gills grew more efficient. Bones and fins shifted to balance the slower flow. Here, in this stillness, a new kind of fish was being written, one shaped not by waves, but by patience. There was danger, insects, sudden floods, cold nights, but there was space. There was quiet. There was less competition and more freedom. They didn't know it, but they were carving a new path for life. One that didn't depend on salt or tide. One that could stretch into forests, lakes, and beyond. And so it is with growth. Sometimes we find ourselves far from what we once knew. It feels unfamiliar, maybe even unsafe. But with time, we adjust. We discover that what seemed too pure, too still, is where something new in us belongs. Competition in new waters, a quiet struggle begins. As more fish ventured into the fresh, still rivers, the waters began to feel less empty. What was once a quiet refuge grew louder in its own way, not with sound, but with tension. There were only so many hiding places beneath the reeds, only so much food drifting by. For the first time in this new world, the early pioneers were not alone. Some fish swam faster, others stayed low and still. Some learned to feed at dusk when others rested. Competition had arrived not with war, but with adaptation. These weren't battles in the open. They were silent contests of survival. A slight advantage in vision, a stronger flick of the tail, a sharper turn near a root. Nature's hand was invisible, but steady. Every adjustment became a story written in muscle and instinct. Over time, new species split away, one for shallow banks, another for deeper pools. What had been one kind of fish was now many, shaped by the quiet press of need. This was how life moved forward, not just by exploring, but by staying and learning how to thrive when others arrived. Sometimes we think peace means no pressure, but often it's in quiet challenges, the subtle competitions of daily life, that we sharpen who we are, not to defeat, but to deepen, to grow into our own small space, fully. Shaped by the stream, diversity takes root. In the stillness of freshwater streams, life began to bloom in unexpected ways. Some rivers ran swift and narrow, with pebbles that danced under rushing currents. Others meandered, slow and soft, with silt like velvet under fin. Each current became a sculptor, each bend in the river a whisper, calling life into new shapes. Fish that once looked alike began to split apart. One group developed broad fins for hovering still in calm pools. Another grew slender and fast, darting through rapids like silver flashes. Even their mouths changed. Some pointed downward to suck tiny morsels from the mud. Others faced upward, catching insects that skimmed the surface. Bit by bit, the freshwater world became a tapestry of difference. No longer a single species in a single place, but a symphony of forms tuned to their home. This was evolution in motion, not dramatic, not loud. Just the slow artistry of nature painting variation where there was once sameness. We, too, are shaped by our rivers, the paths we follow, the environments we rest in. And as we adapt, we diversify, not to compete, but to find where we belong, in harmony with what surrounds us. The brackish border, a meeting of two worlds. Between the river and the sea, a unique world persisted. Not fully salty, not quite fresh. Brackish waters were temperamental, changing with the moon, the season, the rain. And yet, this unstable place became a cradle of creativity. Here, saltwater fish met their freshwater cousins. They didn't always compete. Sometimes, they simply passed through, gliding beside one another like strangers on the same quiet road. Sometimes they adapted together, sharing space in a kind of silent agreement. New hybrids appeared. Some were stronger in both types of water. Others lived only for a short season, then vanished, but left behind traces of possibility. This was not a place of permanence, but of potential. In the estuaries and tidal rivers, life bent rules, rewrote its own nature, and expanded what it meant to belong. In our lives, too, there are brackish places, moments between one thing and another. They may feel uncertain, unstable, but often that's where our most creative selves emerge, where boundaries soften and something surprising begins. A gentle advance, laying the ground for what comes next. By the end of the Silurian, fish had not conquered the land, but they had touched its edges, brushed against its roots, swum through its inland shadows. They had learned to adapt to new currents, to hold their own in fresh water, to share space with strangers. And in doing so, they carved invisible paths through the rivers, preparing the world for those who would follow. These early vertebrates were not giants. They left no towering fossils, but their journey, quiet, persistent, built the foundation of life beyond the sea. The rivers they explored would one day carry amphibians. The soft banks would sprout forests. The waters they swam would cradle eggs, nurture hatchlings, and shape the hearts of future creatures. Sometimes we don't see the impact of what we do. Our steps feel small, our progress slow. But each quiet advance we make becomes the ground someone else will stand on. Even silent journeys matter. 3. Silurian food chain. The silent one's life along the riverbed. Beneath the still surface of a Silurian stream, the world was quiet. Light barely touched the bottom. Only soft rays filtered through water clouded by silt and drifting life. Down here, everything moved slowly, if it moved at all. Stones sat cold and steady. Mud lay in deep blankets. And within that stillness, life flourished. Small worms coiled through the sediment, unseen. Tiny crustaceans crept beneath algae-covered rocks. Mollusks anchored themselves in the silt, sifting through particles of food carried gently by the current. These creatures did not shimmer or leap. They did not hunt, but they fed the river by breaking down dead plants, leftover shells, and all that settled from above, they recycled life into something usable again. They cleaned, they nourished, and they built the base of everything that followed. No one celebrated them, no one noticed them, but if they vanished, the river would fall silent in a very different way. Sometimes the most important work is done in stillness. Quiet tasks, gentle presence. Like the riverbed creatures, there are parts of us that support life without ever needing to be seen. And in that calm invisibility, we are powerful. The drifters, life in the middle waters. Between the muddy bottom and the sunlit surface, the river held a weightless world, a place of drifting, floating, and light. Here, life did not crawl or root itself. It danced. Plankton swirled with the currents, so small they barely cast a shadow. Microscopic algae hovered, turning sunlight into food with quiet devotion. Tiny larvae, new to life, hung in the water like dreams not yet grounded. They moved not by strength, but by surrender. Carried by the gentle push of water, they went where the river led. Some would grow into insects, others would feed fish. Some would vanish, but not without giving something first. This was the invisible middle, a world in motion, full of beginnings. Though fragile, it was essential. Every creature above or below depended on what drifted here. Without the drifters, nothing would grow. No food would rise from the base. The river's breath would pause. We often forget the power of softness. But in the middle space, between ambition and rest, between roots and wings, life floats freely. And in that floating, something sacred happens. It nourishes what is yet to come. The grazers, creatures that feed in peace. Drift a little lower now, dear sleepy history friend. Beneath the flowing plankton, nestled closer to the mud, quiet lives unfolded in their own slow rhythm. Here moved the grazers, gentle creatures with no teeth for tearing, no need to chase. Their mouths brushed across stones, soft silt, or drifting plant matter. Some were armored with plates, others soft-bodied, but all were calm. They fed not on struggle, but on what was already there. They sifted through the detritus, pieces of fallen leaves, fragments of ancient algae, the remains of lives before them. And in doing so, they kept the river clean, the balance smooth. These were not creatures of ambition. They were creatures of presence. Day after day, they followed quiet paths along the riverbed, turning decay into energy, waste into renewal. Without them, algae would smother the water. Light would not reach the depths, and life, the kind that depended on clarity and flow, would falter. There's something noble in peaceful work, in showing up with softness, not speed. In our own lives, too, we often forget the value of simply tending, not striving. Grazing souls, like these creatures, help the world remain whole. The hunters, when silence breaks. Not all creatures in the Silurian rivers lived in stillness. Some moved with sharp intent and hungry eyes. These were the hunters. They didn't roar. There were no splashes or battles. But beneath the reeds and murky current, jaws waited in shadow. Small-jawed fish, the first of their kind, glided with purpose, sensing vibrations in the water. They had teeth now, small but sharp, not for chewing but for catching, for holding, for claiming a meal before it slipped away. Some hunted from below, rising with a sudden flick. Others hovered near roots, motionless, until the perfect moment. Their prey? Drifters, grazers, even one another. It was a quiet kind of violence, necessary, measured. And through it, the river stayed in balance. Because where there are hunters, prey does not overrun. Populations stay in check. Food keeps flowing. And new adaptations rise to meet the challenge. Dear friend drifting into sleep, even in nature, moments of tension bring new balance. In our lives, too, challenges come sharp, unexpected, but they shape us, and when met with grace, they open new ways of being. The top predators, lords of still waters. Further upstream, where the water slowed and widened, larger shapes moved with steady confidence. They were fewer but more powerful, the top predators. These were armored fishes, wrapped in thick plates like ancient knights. With powerful jaws and stronger muscles, they hunted not out of desperation, but control. A slow glide, a sudden lunge, a flash, and the silence resumed. No creature hunted them, and yet they were deeply tied to everything around them. Without prey below, they would starve. Without clean waters, they could not breathe. Without drifters and grazers, the river would lose its rhythm, and they, their thrones. Their presence created space for everything else to exist in order. A living tension holding the web in place. Sometimes, being strong isn't about control. It's about understanding connection. Even those who seem most powerful are upheld by the smallest things. Like us, resting tonight on the quiet kindness of unseen roots. The web itself, a living balance. Now close your eyes for a moment, dear sleepy history soul, and imagine the whole river as one breath. In and out, top to bottom, prey to predator. Everything was connected, from drifting plankton to hidden hunters, from lazy grazers to armored giants. Each played their part in a web spun not by hands, but by time. If even one group vanished, the rest would feel it. The river would grow cloudy, food would disappear, predators would starve, or prey would overrun. This was the Silurians' lesson. Life is not about standing alone, but fitting together. One action echoes another. One presence supports many. This web was not perfect, nor permanent, but for a time it worked. And in its working, it taught the world how to breathe in balance. In your own life, too, every quiet effort matters. Every small kindness, every soft role you play, it all weaves something larger than you. You belong. And just by being, you help hold the world together. Part 3. The first primitive forest ecosystem. 1. Primitive higher plants. The first green canopy, small trees that changed the world. The Silurian earth was quiet. No forests, no birds, only wind moving over stone and moss. But something new was rising. From the damp soil, tiny green stems stretched toward the sun. They were small, only a foot or two tall, but they were bold. These were the world's first trees. Cooksonia, Baragwanathia, Salophyton, ancient names for plants with no true leaves or bark. Just thin stalks and branching tips, topped with spore sacs. Strange, simple, but alive with purpose. They had something earlier plants did not: vascular tissue, little tubes inside their bodies that moved water and nutrients. With it, they no longer had to hug the ground. They could grow upward, and with height came shadow. Dear sleepy history friend, imagine a field of tiny green towers swaying in the wind, casting the first soft shadows on Earth. Not a forest as we know it, but a beginning. Those shadows made a difference. They slowed evaporation. They cooled the soil. They gave cover to moss, to fungi, and to small crawling things seeking shelter. These early trees didn't just rise. They reshaped the world around them, gently, quietly. And in our lives too, the smallest step forward can create shelter for something else. Sometimes, growing even a little can change everything. So rest now, knowing the first forests have begun. and the earth is learning how to hold life in its arms. Moist shadows, the forest's gift of humidity. Not all gifts are loud. As the first trees reached upward, their presence began to change more than just the skyline. Beneath their thin canopies, the world softened. The air grew still, and moisture, precious and fleeting, began to stay. The shadows cast by early plants weren't deep, but they were enough. Enough to slow the sun's heat. Enough to stop the wind from pulling water away too quickly. Underneath, the soil stayed damp longer. The mosses thrived. Spores found safety. Life began to linger, not just pass through. Imagine, dear sleepy history friend, a mist hanging in the quiet between green stalks. The ground still dark with dew even after midday. A hush that made space for life to take root. This wasn't a forest of towering giants. It was a place of stillness, of shelter. Fungi stretched their threads wider. Tiny arthropods explored without drying out. Each drop of water stayed just a little longer, held close by shade and calm. In your own days, too, shade can be a kindness. You don't have to shine all the time. Sometimes, being the place where others rest is its own kind of light. So let the mist surround you now. Let the quiet settle in. And remember that the first forests didn't shout their power. They whispered it through moisture, shadow, and time. The insect pioneers, tiny travelers in the understory. Down beneath the stalks and shadow, a new kind of motion began. They were small, almost invisible, and quiet in every way. But they were first. The first insects. They had no wings, no colors to shine. Only soft bodies, jointed legs, and delicate antennae that trembled at every change in the air. They wandered between roots, over moss, under the shelter of spore-laden stems, feeding not on prey, but on tiny bits of fungus, dead plant matter, and damp decay. They were not hunters. They were caretakers, cleaners, explorers. Their presence changed everything. By breaking down dead things, they fed the soil. By moving from place to place, they helped spread spores. Their footsteps were small, but their impact was wide. Dear sleepy traveler, it is easy to overlook those who move quietly. But so often, the ones who make no noise carry the weight of renewal. As they crept through the green haze of early forests, they carved paths for others. Bigger insects would follow one day, crawling creatures, winged ones, but these pioneers made it possible. And in the cool stillness under the trees, they worked gently, without rush, without need to be seen. There is beauty in small beginnings, in doing what must be done even if no one notices, like a whisper, shaping the world one soft step at a time. So let your breath slow now, and your thoughts grow quiet. Even the smallest among us leave echoes. The arthropod neighbors, millipedes, scorpions, and the forest floor. Not all life in the forest moved silently in shadow. Some wore armor. Some glinted when the mist caught them just right. They were the ancient arthropods, neighbors of the early forest. Millipedes crawled through the damp, their many legs undulating like ripples in soft soil. Some were no bigger than a finger, others longer than your forearm. They fed on fallen leaves and decaying plants, breaking them into food for the earth. Alongside them came the first scorpions. Not like the desert hunters we know today, these lived close to water, breathing through primitive tubes. Some were still learning how to live on land. Their claws clicked softly as they moved between roots and stones, cautious, sensing the air for signs of life. They were slow, deliberate, and deeply connected to the ground beneath them. Dear sleepy history friend, these weren't monsters. They were caretakers of the soil, cleaners, builders of balance. As they tunneled and fed, they loosened the earth, allowing water to flow and roots to grow deeper. Their lives shaped the land beneath the forest's feet. There were no predators yet to chase them, no chaos, just quiet work in the shadows, one step, one breath at a time. And perhaps that's the lesson here. Not every life must chase the sun. Some were made to live close to the earth, to soften it, to make space for others to rise. Rest now, knowing the forest floor was in good hands. Roots and earth, how forests reshaped the land. Before forests, the land was fragile. Every rain pulled the soil downhill. Every gust lifted dry dust into the sky. The earth had no way to hold itself still. But when early plants sent roots into the ground, something began to change. Roots didn't just feed the plant. They held the soil. They wove around grains of sand and anchored rocks in place. Even shallow roots helped keep the land from slipping away. On riverbanks and hillsides, this mattered. Where once the earth washed into streams after every storm, now it stayed. The water flowed clearer. The banks stayed stronger. Life could linger near the edges instead of being swept away. Dear sleepy one, think of the roots in your own life. The quiet things that hold you steady, even when storms come. We don't always see them, but they are there. As forests grew, the soil beneath them changed. Dead leaves and insect droppings added layers of organic matter. Earthworms and millipedes churned it gently, creating the first rich humus, dark, soft, and full of life. What was once just rock and dust became something new, earth that could grow. And sometimes the deepest growth doesn't reach for the sky. It reaches inward, downward, holding the past, feeding the future. So close your eyes now and feel the ground beneath you. Because long ago, in silence and shadow, the forest taught the earth how to stay still. A new web of life, early forests as homes. As the first forests grew taller and deeper, something remarkable happened. Life began to stay. Before, most creatures had wandered, drifting across water, crawling across stone, always moving. But now, for the first time, there were places to rest, places to hide, places to belong. Beneath the canopy, the air was cooler. The soil was richer. Shadows stretched long and soft, and moisture stayed even through the heat of day. Here, fungi curled around roots. Insects nested in tiny hollows, arthropods tucked themselves beneath damp moss. Even some early vertebrates may have crept into the shade, feeling the gentle pull of stillness. Dear sleepy history friend, home is not always walls and roofs. Sometimes, it's simply where the world holds you gently. These forests were still simple, no flowers, no birdsong, no towering trees. But they were enough. Enough to build connections between soil, plant, and creature. Enough to hold a web together. Through tiny exchanges, a spore here, a bit of shelter there, ecosystems began to form. Not just life living side by side, but life supporting life. Holding, feeding, sharing. And maybe in our lives too, that's what makes a place feel like home. Not perfection, but presence. Not structure, but care. So let your thoughts settle now. Imagine a world where green hands cradled the soil and gave every small thing a reason to stay. Because long before we ever built homes of stone, the forest had already shown us how. Too. Forest life begins to stir. Whispers among the leaves, the rise of ancient insects. Beneath the gentle shade of the Silurian forest, the air held a hush, soft, damp, and still. In that silence, something small began to stir. They were the first insects, wingless, silent, and nearly invisible. They crept through moss and fallen stems like ghosts of the soil. Springtails bounced between shadows. Bristletails glided along rough bark. These were not hunters or loud flyers. They were explorers of the smallest corners, quiet, precise, and ancient. Their world was one of touch and scent. Antennae waved gently in the air, sensing moisture, decay, and change. They fed on fungi, plant fragments, and the soft mulch forming beneath the forest floor. Dear sleepy listener, imagine kneeling close to the moss. You wouldn't hear them, but if you watched long enough, you'd see life moving, patient, careful, steady. They helped build the soil one bite at a time. Their droppings became nutrients. Their bodies fed the fungi. They were not just part of the forest, they were its foundation. And though they were small, they left paths behind, narrow corridors for others to follow. Bigger insects, crawling things, life that would one day take flight. Sometimes the most important work is done in silence, in corners no one sees. That is how life begins. Let the hush of the forest fill you now. Let the first footsteps of insects carry you gently into rest. 2. Armored and aware, forest arthropods emerge. As the early forests thickened, new creatures arrived, not soft like insects, but shielded, jointed, and slow. These were the first arthropods of the forest floor. Millipedes with hundreds of legs curled through damp soil, their bodies shining with a dark, polished shell. Some were as long as a human arm, others no bigger than a twig. They moved steadily, feeding on decaying leaves and broken plant stems, turning dead matter into fertile ground. Beside them came early relatives of centipedes and scorpions, cautious, deliberate, and wrapped in armor. Their legs clicked over bark and stone. Their bodies carried the memory of the sea, but they were learning to stay on land. Their hard exoskeletons were more than protection. They prevented water loss, a precious adaptation in a world where sunlight could dry a small creature in moments. Each plate, each joint, was a quiet victory against the dryness of air. They did not rush. They moved with purpose, with patience. Slowly, they expanded the boundaries of where life could thrive. There were no birds yet, no large predators to chase them. Only silence, moisture, and the echo of their tiny feet against stone and root. In time, they would shape the soil, build tunnels, open pathways for water and air. They were not loud, but they were lasting. And deep in the hush of the forest, they made a place for others to follow. Breath of the earth, how arthropods adapted to air. On land, breathing was no longer as simple as in the sea. Water once flowed freely through gills. Now, the air was dry and the risk of drying out was constant. For the arthropods that stepped onto the forest floor, survival meant finding new ways to draw life from the atmosphere. So they changed. Tiny holes opened along their sides, spiracles. Behind them stretched thin tubes called tracheae, winding deep into their bodies like roots of air. Oxygen slipped through without blood, without lungs, moving gently from the outside in. It was simple but enough. Some creatures still clung to moisture, living in shadows and soil where the air stayed damp. Others dared to venture farther, trusting their new breathing systems to carry them forward. This quiet revolution happened in silence. No fanfare, no sudden shift, just the soft hum of adaptation over time. The forest, in return, offered shelter. The damp ground kept spiracles from drying. The cover of moss slowed the wind. It was a partnership, even if neither knew it yet. And in these quiet exchanges, of air, of space, of breath, a deeper connection between life and land began to form. From that moment forward, Earth's surface was no longer a place for water-bound lungs alone. The land could be breathed. Symbiotic ties, life in mutual support. Not everything in the forest competed. Some forms of life leaned toward one another, gently, naturally, in ways that helped both survive. Between plants and arthropods, these early bonds began to take shape. Fungi clung to roots, exchanging nutrients for sugars. Tiny insects, feeding on decaying matter, helped spread spores wherever they roamed. Millipedes broke down leaves, which nourished the soil, which in turn fed the plants again. It wasn't planned, it wasn't conscious, but it worked. In the softness beneath the canopy, life began to weave itself into loops. Not just cycles of birth and decay, but connections. A fallen stem became a bridge. A burrow became shelter. One action led quietly to another. And some arthropods protected the very roots that nourished them, feeding on other decomposers, or tunneling just enough to loosen the soil. Even the smallest choices left ripples. This gentle cooperation didn't look like drama. It looked like stillness, like balance. It was a reminder that not all strength comes from dominance. Some comes from partnership, from listening to what the other needs and offering what you can. Even now, the forests whisper of this, that the most lasting systems are not built on control but connection. Shelters and shadows, forest creatures find refuge. The forest didn't only feed its creatures, cradled them. With every new stem, every patch of moss, it offered shelter, small, silent places for life to pause. Beneath layers of leaf litter, arthropods rested. In bark crevices, insects found darkness and warmth. The first forest was not only alive, it was generous. Roots made tunnels. Rocks formed hollows, damp logs softened with decay and opened their hearts to those who needed them. There were no towering trees yet, no canopy thick enough to block the sun, but there were corners, safe, shaded, and quiet. For a tiny creature, these meant survival. A shield against drying winds, a space to lay eggs, a place to molt, to grow, to wait out the heat. Over time, these refuges shaped behavior. Creatures that had once wandered began to stay close, nesting, returning, belonging. In these small acts, in the stillness of shelter, the feeling of home took root in the forest. Not a place of walls, but one of rhythms, of softness, of return. A tapestry begins, weaving the forest web of life. Bit by bit, the early forest wove itself into a web. No single species ruled. No structure guided it. But every action, each bite, each step, each breath, pulled a thread into place. The insects breaking down leaf litter made food for fungi. The fungi fed the soil fed the plants. The plants gave shelter to the insects again. Even death fed life. When a creature fell, its body returned to the ground. Millipedes and beetles broke it down. This matter was passed on, not lost. The network wasn't visible, but it was real. This was the beginning of ecosystems, systems where every life form depended on others, where no one existed alone. There were no predators yet, no complex hierarchies, only a quiet cooperation, a balance held not by force, but by need. And that, perhaps, is what gave it strength. In today's world, we often look for power in scale, in size, in control. But in the forest's beginning, power came from interconnection, from giving, not taking. The early forest didn't just host life, it taught life how to live together. And in its hush, its damp breath, and its layered shadows, it still remembers. 3. When forests changed the world. The breath of green forests and carbon dioxide. Long ago, the sky held more carbon than today. Its breath was heavier, warmer, thick with the size of volcanoes and the quiet exhale of oceans. But on land, the forests had begun to grow. Each leaf, small and patient, opened to the sun. Each blade of green stretched upward not just for light, but for air. And within their gentle skin, something beautiful happened. They took in carbon dioxide. Slowly, with every sunrise, forests pulled the gas from the sky, not in great bursts, but in millions of tiny breaths. Bit by bit, the warmth of the world began to soften. The sky grew clearer, the heat more gentle. And where did the carbon go? It didn't vanish. It became part of the trees, part of the roots, the stems, the fallen leaves. It rested in bark and buried itself in soil. What was once floating freely became held, stored, quiet. Forests, without knowing, had begun to change the planet. They were not loud about it. They simply did what they were made to do: breathe, grow, and hold on. Sometimes, change doesn't come in waves. It comes in whispers, in green hands lifting sunlight, in silent breaths that cool the world. Close your eyes now. Imagine a world where every leaf was a breath, and every breath brought balance. That was the gift of the forest. Soft layers, the rise of soil and humus. At first, the land was bare, just rock and dust, cracked by wind and rain. But the forest had a secret. It knew how to soften even stone. Leaves fell, tiny twigs snapped, creatures crawled, fed, and faded. And over time, these quiet endings became the start of something new. Layer by layer, the ground began to change. The forest shed gently, not in loud crashes, but in rustles. Curled leaf, a broken stem, a beetle's body left beneath the moss. These fragments settled, pressed into the earth, and turned dark and rich with life. Fungi reached out like unseen fingers, breaking down what remained. Microbes swam in invisible rivers. Together, they spun the scraps of the forest into humus, a soft, fertile layer where roots could nest and water could stay. This wasn't just decay. It was transformation. The land, once silent and dry, now held stories in its soil, of seasons passing, of life giving back. And in this dark bed of humus, the next generation found what it needed: nutrients, shelter, a place to begin. The forest taught the earth how to hold memory, not in words, but in layers. When things fall away, they do not vanish. They become the ground we grow from. Holding the water, forests shape the flow. Before the forest, water had no guide. Rain fell and the earth could not catch it. Rivers swelled with sudden floods, carving through soil, pulling it away grain by grain. But when roots grew deep, the land began to hold. Each tree sent fingers downward, not just for nutrients, but for strength. Roots gripped soil. Moss blanketed slopes. Ferns spread wide like green umbrellas, catching the rain before it hit the ground. Now, when the rain came, it was welcomed, slowed, sipped, shared. The forest became a sponge, soaking in what it needed, giving back what it could. Water no longer rushed to the sea. It lingered, sank deep, fed springs that bubbled up slowly and quietly days later. Streams flowed more gently. Riverbanks stood firm. This wasn't control. It was cooperation. Land and life working together to soften the rush, to tame the storm. And in the quiet rhythm of raindrop and root, a new pattern emerged. One of steadiness, of care. Sometimes, to hold something precious, you don't need to trap it. You simply need to slow it down, let it stay a little longer. That is what the forest did with water. And in doing so, it taught the earth a new kind of calm. The first climate engineers, forests regulate their world. As more forests spread across the land, their breath changed the sky. Each leaf was a small green engine, exhaling moisture, releasing invisible clouds into the air. These clouds gathered and cooled, drifting upward until they formed mist, then droplets, then rain. Forests didn't just respond to climate. They made it. The more they grew, the more they breathed. The more they breathed, the more they shaped the wind, the weather, the warmth. Moisture rose from the canopy in soft, rising waves, cooling the air above. Sunlight filtered through the leaves, gentle and golden, rather than harsh and bare. Day by day, the planet's skin became more balanced, more comfortable. Forests stitched together a living cycle: water to air, air to cloud, cloud to rain. A loop so quiet, so dependable that life could begin to depend on it. They became the world's first climate engineers, not with tools but with time, with shade, with softness. It's easy to forget how something still and rooted can have such reach. But in the hush of ancient woods, a new atmosphere was born, cooler, moister, kinder. The forest did not plan this. It simply lived as it was meant to, and in doing so, made the world more livable. Even now, clouds remember where they first learned to form. From rock to garden, how forests transformed land. In the beginning, the land was stone, broken, cracked, and cold. A world of hard edges, waiting. And the forest arrived like a gentle sculptor. Roots crept into cracks. Water followed. Time passed. Together, they broke the unbreakable. Lichens and mosses softened stone surfaces, pulling tiny grains loose. Acid from roots dissolved minerals slowly. Fungi traded sugars for nutrients, unlocking what once lay hidden inside ancient rock. Bit by bit, the ground changed color, darkened, deepened, became soil, and that soil, born of patience and persistence, became the cradle of forests to come. Each fallen leaf added more. Each passing generation built upon the last. From solid earth rose a living foundation. From rock to garden. From silence to song. That was the journey. And in that journey lies a truth for us, too. Change, real change, is not sudden. It is not loud. It comes from presence, from repetition, from choosing again and again to grow where we are planted, even when the ground is hard. The earth did not force itself open. It listened to what the roots had to say. And now, where once there was only stone, there is life. Part 4. Silurian Climate and Geology. 1. Ordovician Post-Glacial Warming Climate. As the ice melts, the planet begins to learn to breathe again, and step by step, the climate finds its first balance. The end of a frozen silence, the last breath of the ice. Close your eyes, dear friend. Can you feel it? A hush, a stillness so complete that even time seems to hold its breath. We are standing at the edge of the Ordovician Ice Age, a chapter of deep cold and quiet sorrow. The Earth, once vibrant with marine life, now lies hushed beneath a pale shroud of ice. Vast glaciers stretch from the poles like sleeping giants. The oceans retreat. Coastal lands, once teeming with trilobites and coral reefs, fall silent beneath layers of frost. The air is dry and thin, the sky pale like polished bone. Winds howl over icy plains. Life clings to what little warmth remains. In deep ocean pockets, or tucked into cracks beneath frozen waves. This was a time of endings, of loss. Nearly 85% of marine species gone, swept away by the chill. And yet, not all is still. Beneath the ice, something stirs. From the belly of the earth, volcanoes begin to murmur. Their breath, carbon dioxide, slips quietly into the sky. A greenhouse whisper, soft, slow, persistent. The silence of the cold is not forever. The planet is beginning to shift, not with violence, but with gentle insistence. And just like that, the long winter prepares to exhale. Melting giants. When the ice began to retreat, the silence did not break all at once. It melted. Slowly, imperceptibly, the great glaciers began to breathe again. They groaned and creaked, ancient bodies stirred by a warming world. Sunlight, once too weak to reach their hearts, now lingered longer each day. A soft golden hand upon ancient frost. Rivulets formed, then trickles, then rivers. From beneath towering walls of ice, water began to weep. These were not floods of fury, but tears of release. The earth was letting go of its long-held cold. Glaciers shrank, not in surrender, but in return, in yielding back the land they had claimed. Every drop of meltwater carried memory, of pressure, of time, of silence. And the world, in turn, began to wake. Shorelines blurred as water returned to the oceans. Ancient seabeds felt waves again. The rhythm of tides shifted, gently coaxing the planet into a new song. One composed not of ice and wind, but of water and warmth. There is something deeply healing about thawing. It does not rush. It does not force. It simply allows. And so the earth began its healing, not with fanfare, but with the soft retreat of frozen giants. Rising seas, sinking lands, oceans returned to the shore. As the glaciers melted, the seas began to rise. Not in anger, but in embrace. Water returned to where it once belonged. Swelling coastlines, creeping into lowlands, tracing old paths that had lain dry for ages. The continents, shaped by cold, now felt the kiss of salt again. Floodplains reawakened. Estuaries opened. Inlet by inlet, the ocean reclaimed its space. But the rising water did more than reshape the coasts. It reshaped life. Flooded shelves became nurseries once more. Shallow marine habitats spread wide, bathed in sunlight and stirred by gentle waves. These were ideal cradles for new beginnings. Coral reefs, shellfish beds, and soft-bodied creatures, all returning to their watery homes. And beneath the surface, sediments began to settle. Layers of silt, sand, and stories, slowly building the archives of Earth's changing face. Some lands sank beneath the tide. Others stood firm, but all of them changed. This was not destruction. It was transformation. The sea was not erasing. It was reminding that land and water are not enemies, but dancers in an ancient duet. One rises, the other yields, and together they create space for life to move forward. A climate in balance, the first gentle equilibrium. With the glaciers in retreat and the oceans in rhythm, the climate began to calm. Gone were the extremes, the biting winters, the sudden shifts. In their place came something rare and precious. Steadiness. Temperatures leveled. The skies grew clearer. Winds lost their bite and learned to wander more gently. It was as though the earth, weary from its long cold breath, had settled into a new heartbeat. Warm but not harsh. Moist but not suffocating. For the first time in eons, life was given consistency. A chance to adapt, to try again, to stretch slowly toward the sun without fear of another deep freeze. This gentle stability allowed ecosystems to root themselves. Coral reefs, algal blooms, tiny crustaceans with translucent shells. On land, moisture and warmth beckoned the mosses, the fungi, and the first hints of forest breath. It was a pause, but not of stillness. A balance, but not of boredom. It was the kind of peace in which life learns to grow. We often search for stability, not as an end, but as a beginning. And so did the earth. Not every chapter is fire or frost. Some are the soft in-betweens where healing takes hold. The sky learns to flow winds and waters in harmony. The warming of the earth changed more than oceans and glaciers. It changed the air itself. As temperatures stabilized, the winds began to flow in new patterns. No longer erratic, no longer howling, but soft and circular. High above, in invisible streams, air currents carried warmth and moisture across the globe. Evaporation increased. Clouds formed more readily. But these clouds didn't gather into storms. They gathered into rhythm. Rain fell more predictably, like a quiet heartbeat pulsing through valleys and plains. Tiny raindrops kissed the moss-covered earth, soaking deep into roots that now waited patiently beneath the surface. The sky, once an arena of icy chaos, had learned to nourish. These early rains helped the soil hold firm. They fed the freshwater rivers that carved new paths inland. They taught the land how to breathe again. It was not a dramatic revolution, but a whispering revelation. The sky and earth no longer struggled for control. They listened, they danced, and from this slow atmospheric waltz, a new world began to take shape, one shaped not by force, but by cooperation. From cold to calm, a living planet awakens. In the silence that followed the melt, something extraordinary bloomed. Calm. The earth, once shaken by cycles of extinction and ice, now stood at the dawn of a long, gentle breath. This breath warmed the soil, fed the seas, awakened the sky, and in every corner of the world, life returned the gesture. Algae painted the ocean in soft greens. Coral reefs pulsed with color. On land, ruffled mosses spread across stone, tracing their way into light. Tiny insects stirred. Early fungi bloomed. It was subtle but everywhere. This was a time of rebuilding, not fast, not loud, but sure. A time when Earth was no longer fighting to survive, but learning to thrive. And just as the planet healed, so too may we. There are winters in every life, moments of quiet, of numbness, of withdrawal. But if we allow warmth to return, even slowly, we too can melt. We can rise. We can begin again. Because the story of the earth is also a story of us. And it reminds us, from cold can come calm. And from calm, life. 2. Plate tectonics. When the continental plates move, the earth does not scream, but moves gently as if writing an ancient letter in stone, in sea, in time. Shifting stones, the earth beneath begins to move. Beneath the quiet skies of the Silurian world, the earth began to stir, not in violence, but in a long, slow sigh. After the long stillness of the Ice Age, the very crust of the planet loosened its grip, and ancient stones began to drift. The continents of this ancient Earth were not fixed, like painted shapes on a map. They were rafts of rock, floating on a restless sea of molten heat deep below. Slowly, so slowly, they began to move again. Laurentia, Baltica, Avalonia, these vast landmasses, once scattered across ancient oceans, began to drift toward one another like long-lost friends returning after centuries apart. Their paths did not crash or roar. Instead, they crept forward inch by inch, year by year, pulled together by unseen forces in the mantle beneath. There was no sound, no thunder, only silence and motion, and yet this motion would shape everything. Where the plates moved together, mountains would rise. Where they sank, the sea would flow in. Life would respond. Landscapes would evolve. The earth was not sleeping. It was stretching, realigning, preparing new ground for life to walk upon. Sometimes the greatest changes happen beneath our feet, slowly, silently, until one day, everything is different. Continents drawing closer when the land reunites. Imagine, dear sleeper, a map not of now but of long ago, when continents were not where they are today. In the Silurian world, the land was scattered across the globe like drifting puzzle pieces. But now those pieces were beginning to draw near. Laurentia, ancient and craggy, drifted slowly across warm equatorial waters. Baltica, proud and northern, floated toward it from the other side. And Avalonia, like a delicate fragment of broken plate, curved gently into the space between them. With every passing century, they inched closer, pulled together by invisible threads of mantle convection far below. There was no rush, no sudden embrace, just a slow, inevitable gathering of stone. This convergence would one day form the foundation of a new supercontinent, Euramerica. But in this moment, it was just the beginning, a soft pulling of land toward land. Where they approached, shallow seas narrowed. Coral reefs bent with the current. Fish that had once known open oceans now swam in tightening bays. Currents shifted, winds found new paths, and life adapted. The earth was assembling something new, and like the way hearts can drift apart, then find one another again, so too did these ancient lands, quietly, without noise, but with profound consequence. Sometimes, closeness returns not with drama, but with grace. Edges that sink, the quiet collapse of margins. While continents gently drifted toward reunion, something quieter, yet just as important, was happening at their edges. Not all land was firm. Along the outer rims of these moving plates, the crust was thinner, more fragile, like the soft hem of a worn-out robe. These edges, weighed down by sediment and subtle pressure, began to sink ever so slowly. This was not a collapse with sound or ruin. It was more like a bow, the land gently yielding to the deep, folding into itself with time. These sinking margins created broad, shallow basins, sunken bowls where seawater crept in. And in those flooded edges, life returned in gentle abundance. Tiny plankton drifted in nutrient-rich shallows. Corals reached upward, building reefs where none had stood. Layers of silt began to gather, laying the groundwork for tomorrow's fossils. These quiet troughs became nurseries for the ocean's revival, soft cradles carved not by violence, but by patient surrender. And perhaps, dear sleeper, there's a lesson here, that yielding is not always weakness. Sometimes, it is how new life begins, by letting go, by giving in, just enough to become something more. Mountains that whisper, low ridges rise by the sea. Where land met land, not in collision, but in subtle pressure, new forms began to rise. Not towering peaks or jagged cliffs, but low, soft ridges, the first mountains of the Silurian. These were not born in fury, no eruptions, no earthquakes, just the slow lifting of stone as continents pressed gently together. Along ancient coasts, the earth puckered like quiet folds in fabric. Valleys rippled, ridges swelled, And where once there were flatlands, now stood rolling hills, shaded, sheltered, ready for change. These mountains, though modest, reshaped the landscape. They guided rivers, cast shadows across new forests, and created microclimates where life could take refuge. Winds, once free to sweep across vast plains, now danced around slopes. Moisture gathered in folds and hollows, encouraging the spread of moss, fungi, and soft-rooted plants. In this, we see how even the smallest shift in terrain can birth new worlds. A few meters of height, a gentle curve in the land, and suddenly the story changes. So too in life, dear friend, not all transformation is dramatic. Sometimes it comes like a whisper, like a low hill on the horizon, quiet, undeniable, lasting. Landforms that shape life, the silent architects of ecosystems. As these soft mountains rose and basins formed, the earth began crafting something more than just shape. It was designing homes. Landforms are not just features. They are invitations to wind, to water, to life. A gentle slope might collect morning mist, nurturing a pocket of moss. A shaded ridge could protect fragile insects from the afternoon heat. A valley, open to rain but shielded from harsh gales, becomes a perfect cradle for new beginnings. During the Silurian, these shifting landscapes began to weave ecosystems. Inland basins held shallow lakes, rich with nutrients. Hills slowed the wind, letting spores and seeds fall gently to fertile soil. Coastal ridges protected estuaries where young fish and invertebrates could grow in peace. These weren't grand cities of stone, but quiet blueprints drawn in earth. Natural architecture, thoughtful, slow, and alive. Even the placement of one rock could change the life that grew around it. It reminds us that the shape of the world matters, that form guides feeling, that shelter, even simple shelter, is often the beginning of thriving. And sometimes the land knows what we forget: to make room, to lift gently, to curve where needed. The earth that breathes, a planet in motion, a planet alive. If you could have placed your hand on the ground in the Silurian, you might not have felt a thing. No shaking, no sound, but deep beneath, the earth was breathing. Not in lungs, but in motion. Not in heartbeats, but in tectonic pulses. These drifting plates, these rising hills and sinking shores, they were the Earth's way of saying, I am not still. I am not finished. The planet was alive not just in its life forms, but in its bones. And from those slow movements came everything: warmth, oceans, continents, change. This breathing earth reminds us that growth doesn't always roar. Creaks, it shifts, it waits, and so must we. For in our own lives, there are tectonic moments, changes beneath the surface that no one sees. Healing that doesn't shout, direction that isn't obvious. But if we trust the movement, however small, we may find one day that we, too, have formed something new. Quietly, beautifully, inevitably. Like mountains born from silence. Like continents coming home. 3. The Silurian sea environment. On the calm ocean floor, life breathes again. In coral, in shells, in the silent dances of tiny creatures, but profound. The return of the reef, coral cities reborn. Close your eyes, dear sleepy soul. Let the quiet waves carry you. Let your breath slow, like the ancient tides. Far beneath the surface, in a world long forgotten, the ocean is stirring again. After the silence left behind by the great extinction, the waters of the Silurian begin to warm. Sunlight, soft and golden, returns to the shallows. And there, in the calm, something ancient awakens. Corals, small and steady, start to build. Not in haste, not in sound, but in patience. One polyp at a time, reaching, anchoring, becoming. They grow into vast reef systems, rough, strange, beautiful. Made not just of coral, but of early sponges, tabulate forms, and layered stromatoporoids. These reefs are not loud, but they are alive. Tiny fish flicker between shadows. Shelled creatures nestle into crevices. The reef becomes a cradle, a shelter, a quiet sanctuary where life begins again. And perhaps, just like these ancient reefs, you too are rebuilding silently, slowly, layer by layer. Because healing doesn't need noise, only time and gentleness. Now breathe and float onward. Biodiversity in blue, a flourish of sea life. Drift with me now through waters bathed in soft blue. In the heart of the Silurian Sea, life is returning. Not in shouts, but in quiet bursts of variety. Here, every layer of the ocean holds a secret. At the bottom, tiny worms burrow in the mud, churning the sand gently. Higher up, soft-bodied creatures float like ribbons, graceful and pale. Schools of jawless fish shimmer past, their bodies covered in simple armor. There are shelled nautiloids with curious eyes, trilobites crawling like ancient beetles, and early crustaceans dancing on the seafloor. Above them, plankton blooms in the light, invisible to the eye, yet feeding all that moves below. Each form of life finds its place. Nothing rushes, nothing overpowers. The sea becomes a layered symphony of balance. In this diversity, there is resilience. Dear dreamer, maybe your life, too, is made of layers, seen and unseen. Maybe your journey isn't about being one thing, but about holding many forms of beauty at once. Just like the Silurian Sea, soft, vast, and quietly alive. Silent predators, the rise of ocean hunters. Even in calm seas, there are hunters. But in the Silurian world, predators did not roar. They glided. In the shadows of coral, long-bodied eurypterids, sea scorpions, crept with armored grace. Their claws moved with eerie precision, catching prey before it even knew. Some grew larger than a human arm, yet still moved like ghosts through the reef. Elsewhere, jawless armored fish waited. Though slow, they were built like shields, protected from above and ready to feed from the soft seafloor. Predators came in many shapes: swimmers, crawlers, ambushers. But they all shared something: silence. There were no teeth-chattering battles, no blood in the water, just motion, purpose, precision. Each predator fit neatly into the puzzle of the sea, keeping the balance by choosing, feeding, moving. And so, the ocean learned to stay alive not just through creation, but through hunger. Sometimes, dear sleeper, growth comes with letting go. Even in nature, death feeds life, and predators too play their part. It's all part of the rhythm. A breath in, a breath out, a life ends, another begins, all in balance. The web rewoven, rebuilding the marine food chain. Look deeper now into the threads beneath the waves. Invisible to the eye, but holding everything together, the food web. After the great extinction, this web had torn, but the sea, always patient, wove it back, thread by shining thread. At the base, the plankton, tiny but mighty. Feeding them, the filter feeders, brachiopods, early sponges, soft-bodied grazers. Then come the swimmers, jawless fish, crustaceans, trilobites, feeding on what drifts or crawls. And above them, the hunters, quiet, efficient, precise. Each life form connects to another. No link is too small. It's a fragile balance, yet somehow strong like lace. Delicate but whole, vulnerable but vital. This is how the ocean survives. Not by strength, but by connection. Perhaps, friend, your life has threads like this too: relationships, habits, memories. When one breaks, the pattern shifts, but it can be rewoven. Softly, silently, just like the Silurian Sea. Oceans of balance, when life and water breathe together. Now breathe in, and imagine the ocean breathing with you. The Silurian seas are no longer empty. They pulse with life. They move with rhythm. They are not wild. They are not loud. They are in balance. Sunlight warms the surface. Algae bloom, feeding the plankton. Coral reefs filter the water, giving homes to many. Fish stir sediment below, and scavengers keep it clean. It is a system not just of survival but of harmony. The water doesn't crash. It flows. The creatures don't fight. They fit. In this living sea, everything plays a role. Even the quietest motion matters. And so, Earth breathes not with lungs but with patterns. You too, dear listener, are part of a system. Even on days when you feel lost or small, your presence feeds something. A smile, a kindness, a ripple. We are like the Silurian Ocean, quietly giving, quietly receiving, quietly alive. Let that thought carry you now like a tide. Let it take you gently to rest. Part 5. Silurian Characteristic Creatures. More than just corals and mosses, the Silurian was a time of strange creatures. Creatures that were half familiar, half strange, quietly weaving the foundations for complex life to come. 1. Typical marine animals. Ammonoids and brachiopods, the elegant dwellers. Let the sea cradle you once more. Dear sleepy listener, beneath the gentle waves of the Silurian, quiet creatures began to shape the seabed. They were not swift, not fierce, but they were artists in stillness, building with symmetry, living with grace. Among the first were brachiopods, small, shelled beings that looked like clams but were something different entirely. Their shells, curved like folded wings, opened just enough to let water in, and with it, life. They anchored themselves to the sea floor, unmoving but alert, filtering the water for food as it passed by. Nearby, in deeper or warmer waters, early ammonoids were beginning to appear, cousins of squids and octopuses, but wrapped in tight, spiraled shells. They drifted, light and thoughtful, with tentacles extended like curious fingers. They would not become abundant until later, but even now, they hinted at the ocean's future poetry. These creatures, quiet, patient, content, were the architects of rhythm beneath the sea. They did not chase. They did not flee. They simply were. Sometimes it's enough just to stay still, to filter the world gently, and let the currents carry what you need. Let their presence soothe you now. A reminder that life doesn't always have to move fast to be full. Graptolites, the floating script of time. Float a little deeper now. The waters grow cooler, quieter, and in that hush, something ancient drifts, like a forgotten sentence written in the ink of the sea. Graptolites, they are small, delicate, and easy to miss. Yet they were once among the most widespread creatures of the ancient ocean. They didn't crawl or swim. They floated, tiny colonies suspended in the water, each made up of many slender, connected cups, like rows of fine calligraphy. Their fragile forms waved gently in the currents, feeding on drifting plankton. No eyes, no jaws, no voice, only presence. And when they died, their bodies settled into the seafloor mud, leaving behind black imprints like pressed flowers. These marks would fossilize beautifully, preserved for hundreds of millions of years. Geologists today read them like timestamps, signs of Earth's ancient chapters. To float and to leave behind beauty, to feed gently and vanish softly, that was their way. Dear soul, perhaps you too are writing something, not with a pen, but with how you live, breathe, rest. Maybe the softest gestures leave the longest echoes. Let the current carry you like the graptolite, drifting without fear, present without force, quiet and eternal. Jawless armored fish, the gentle ancestors. Sink with me now, just a little further. The light fades, but the ocean is still warm, still kind. And here, resting on the muddy seafloor, are the ostracoderms, the gentle ancestors. They have no jaws, no teeth to bite, but they wear armor, heavy plates of bone covering their heads and bodies, like silent shields shaped by time. They are small, slow, and close to the bottom, where they sift through silt for food. There is a stillness to them, a humility, as if they carry not just bone but memory, the memory of what will come after. For these humble fish are the earliest vertebrates, the very first to have spines. From their quiet presence will one day rise creatures that swim, walk, fly, even speak. But they do not hurry. They do not know. They simply live armored, soft within, strong without. They are the beginning of something vast. Sometimes, dear listener, strength does not roar. It is quiet. It is patient. It is the willingness to carry the weight of change. And wait. So rest now beside these slow, ancient swimmers. Let their peace become your own. Sea scorpions, Silurians, silent hunters. Not far from the gentle fish, something stirs. It moves with purpose, with power, but not with sound. This is the domain of the Eurypterid, the sea scorpion, a predator of the Silurian seas. Long and graceful, armored like a knight, it glides over the seabed. Some are small, others grow longer than a grown human's arm. Their pincers flex with precision. Their eyes, sharp and unblinking, scan for motion. They do not thrash. They flow. These creatures are hunters, yes, but they are also artists of movement. Every gesture calculated, every pursuit silent. They lived in saltwater and freshwater, in warm tidal flats and deeper marine pools. They adapted, they endured, and even in their fierceness there is a kind of beauty, a reminder that not all danger is wild. Some arrives on quiet legs. In life, we may fear the things that sneak up on us, unseen, unspoken, but sometimes they teach us focus, stillness, precision. Just like the sea scorpion, you too may be learning to move with care. Let the water soften your tension. Let the fear dissolve. You are safe here. Crinoids and echinoderms, stars beneath the sea. Lift your gaze now, not toward the sky, but to the sea floor, where stars bloom upside down. These are crinoids, the feathered cousins of sea stars and sea urchins. They root themselves like flowers, raising delicate arms into the current. Each arm is lined with tiny fingers, filtering food from the drifting sea. Soft, constant, beautiful. To watch them is to see patience in motion. They sway but do not wander. They bloom but do not rush. Even the passing of water becomes a rhythm in their arms. Around them live other echinoderms, ancient sea lilies, early brittle stars, spiny urchins. A slow ballet of shapes, all following the same quiet current. These creatures ask for nothing but a stable rock and gentle flow. And maybe, dear one, you too long for that. Something solid beneath you, something soft around you, a moment to just exist. Crinoids remind us, you don't have to chase to grow. You don't have to move to matter. Let yourself be still tonight. Let yourself open and receive. Tiny builders, the forgotten architects. We end where things often begin, with the smallest. Beneath the drama of hunters and reefs, there were creatures no larger than a grain of sand. Trilobites, still lingering in their shrinking glory. Ostracods, tiny shelled animals flitting through the water. Microscopic builders that filtered, tunneled, stirred the seafloor without sound. They did not shine, they did not hunt, but they built the foundations of everything above. By breaking down waste, they fed the soil. By becoming food, they supported the chain. By existing, they allowed everything else to thrive. We forget them because they were small, but life has always been layered, and every towering reef rests on a bed of quiet labor. Dear listener, perhaps you felt small too, unseen, uncelebrated, but your presence, your quiet acts, they matter more than you know. The tiniest builders left marks that time could not erase. So rest tonight, knowing you are part of something vast, something built from stillness and kindness. 2. Primitive insects and arthropods. They had no voice, no bones left behind, but in that silence, insects and arthropods gradually laid the foundations for life to spread to land and sea. Last of the trilobites, the fading lords. The sea was quieter now. Gone were the wild bursts of Cambrian life, the crowded reefs of the Ordovician. And yet, somewhere beneath the gentle waves, the trilobites still crawled, ancient, small, and holding on. They had once ruled these waters. For hundreds of millions of years, they were everywhere. Scuttling across seafloors, burrowing through mud, watching with their many-eyed gaze. Their bodies, like segmented shields, were marvels of design, a harmony of protection and movement. But now they were fewer, slower, and the world was changing. New predators hunted the silted depths. The chemistry of the water was shifting, but still these trilobites endured, digging through soft sediments, filtering for food, moving with a wisdom shaped by time. They did not protest their fading. They simply continued, and in that quiet persistence, they whispered something timeless, that to endure even in decline is a kind of grace. Dear sleepy soul, perhaps tonight you carry the weight of endings, of things changing, fading, slipping away. But like the trilobites, you are still here, still moving, still part of the great story. Rest now, and let the last lords of the Silurian cradle you in their gentle, ancient rhythm. Ancient sea spiders, silent watchers of the depths. Sink gently now, deeper, darker, where the light is only a memory. Here, among the rippling forests of algae and the whispering stones, move the sea spiders, creatures older than imagination, stranger than myth. Their legs are long, thin, almost delicate. Their bodies, small and simple, seem hardly there at all. And yet, they live, creeping over coral, threading through narrow spaces, reaching with slow, searching limbs. They do not rush. They do not speak. They feel. Sea spiders do not spin webs, nor do they hunt with venom. Instead, they move through the silence, feeding gently from the soft tissues of stationary animals. Anemones, sponges, the things that do not run. They are watchers, not warriors. And in the hush of the ancient sea, they are part of its pulse. They remind us that life is not always loud or bright. Sometimes it is shadowy, quiet, unsure. and still deeply present. Dear listener, have you ever felt invisible, unseen in the noise of the world? Like the sea spider, your value is not in being noticed. It is in your stillness, your perception, your ability to feel what others cannot. Rest now as they crawl through your dreams, guardians of the deep, gentle and strange. Early insect ancestors, footsteps toward the forests. Now let us rise, gently, slowly, toward the shoreline, where land meets sea and the air begins to breathe. Here, in damp, mossy corners, tiny creatures scuttle between fallen leaves and soft stones. They are not quite insects yet, but they are learning. Their bodies are simple, segmented like little armored threads. Some are soft like springtails, others more solid, like primitive silverfish. They cannot fly, they do not buzz, but they move curious, quiet, and new. These ancient walkers do not conquer the land. They explore it, one step at a time. They feed on what falls, flakes of dead algae, crumbling plant matter, the leftovers of the forest's early breath. And in doing so, they begin a silent revolution, turning death into life, turning decay into soil. These tiny ancestors carried no names. No one celebrated their arrival, but they laid the path for forests, for animals, for us. Dear one, remember this. Even the smallest, softest steps can change everything. Let yourself be small tonight. Let yourself be enough. Decomposers, keepers of the circle. In the hush beneath the trees, among roots and stones, the decomposers go to work. They are not predators. They do not chase. They wait. And when life ends, a leaf falls, a creature slips away, they begin their sacred task. Millipedes, tiny beetles, worm-like arthropods. They move through the shadows, breaking down what was once alive into what will live again. They are not praised, but without them, the forest would choke on its own memories. They clear, they soften, they give back. Decomposers are not endings. They are beginnings in disguise. And so, too, are many things we fear. Dear heart, perhaps something in your life is falling away, breaking down. It may feel like loss, like rot, but maybe, just maybe, it is the soil of something new. Let the decomposers teach you. To surrender is not to vanish. It is to become part of the circle. Breathe out now. Let go. Something beautiful may rise from what you release. Symbiosis and scavengers, webs of connection. Step a little closer. Look carefully beneath the moss, inside the bark, along the tidipools. Life is not living alone. Here, the early arthropods do not only survive, they connect. Some live among the roots of primitive plants, helping them absorb nutrients. Others ride on the backs of ancient sea creatures, cleaning their bodies as they move. Scavengers clear the floor of remains. Detritivores turn waste into nourishment. None of them hunt, yet all of them sustain. This is not war. It is weaving a web of shared presence, soft and strong. Symbiosis, dear soul, is not about taking. It is about trusting, about knowing that we need each other, even in silence. And maybe, tonight, you can feel your own threads, the unseen bonds that hold you to the people, places, and memories that nourish you most. You are not alone in your rest. You are part of a living web. Let it hold you. Legacy in silence, the power of the unseen. As the Silurian winds blow gently across the fern-lined shores, and the waters settle once more, the smallest creatures go unseen. But they are there, always. Under every root, behind every stone, inside every cycle, the arthropods are working. Quiet, tireless, invisible, and long after the loud creatures pass, they remain, breaking down, building up, connecting all. Their legacy is not fossilized in bone or glory. It is written in soil, in the way forests grew, in the way rivers flowed clearer, in the way earth itself could breathe. Dear listener, perhaps you too wonder if what you do matters. If your quiet work, your unseen care, your soft presence has value. Let this truth comfort you. The smallest voices shape the strongest worlds. Sleep now, knowing that you do not have to be seen to be essential. Your legacy is growing, even in stillness. 3. Ecosystem interconnection. All life depends on each other, and in this intertwining, the Silurian Earth began to weave its first web, a living, sustainable ecological tapestry. Web of life, the first predators and prey. In the gentle flow of Silurian waters, something had changed. Life no longer simply drifted or filtered, it hunted. For the first time, eyes scanned the ripples for movement. Jaws, new and curious, opened not for plants or floating dust, but for flesh. Primitive-jawed fish, sleek and small, began their silent chase. With each flick of the tail, they moved with purpose, to catch, to feed, to survive. Below them, creatures crawled. Soft-bodied worms, ancient trilobites, and tiny arthropods lived in the silt. They had no teeth, no speed. They hid beneath sand, clung to rocks, or flattened their bodies to disappear. Their world had become a place of caution, but this too was balance. Predators pushed the prey to grow smarter, quicker, or better hidden. Prey, in turn, shaped the hunters, refining senses, speed, and skill. It was not cruelty. It was evolution weaving its first tapestry of tension. Dear sleepy soul, the challenges in your life, too, may feel like teeth, but often they shape you into something stronger, something more awake to the world. Even in the dance of chase and escape, there is beauty. There is order. Now rest. Let the tide carry you onward. More than enemies, symbiosis in early ecosystems. Not all creatures competed. Some, in the quiet corners of the Silurian world, chose to cooperate. Among the mossy rocks and shallow pools, tiny fungi reached out with thread-like arms. Nearby, algae bathed in sunlight, rich in energy but rooted in place. When they touched, something ancient and powerful began. Symbiosis. These two became one, forming the first lichens. Fungi brought shelter and minerals. Algae gave sugar and light. Together, they survived places neither could endure alone. Dry stones, salty coasts, the bare bones of the land. Elsewhere, small animals harbored helpful microbes in their guts to digest tough plants. Some arthropods lived among early plants, protecting them from grazers in exchange for nectar. It wasn't war. It was weaving quiet bonds born not from strength, but from trust. This was evolution's gentler voice. And perhaps, dear one, you too have found unexpected partners in your journey. People or moments that stayed, held you, helped you grow. They may not have looked like saviors, but like lichen on stone, they made life more livable. Let that memory settle in your heart tonight. You are not meant to go alone. Parasitism, survival in the shadows. Not every connection is kind. In the dark folds beneath coral shelves, and in the hidden tissues of early animals, another kind of relationship took root. One that took without giving. Parasitism. Tiny worms slipped inside the gills of fish. Protozoa clung to bloodstreams, invisible yet draining. Even then, in Earth's early seas, there were lives built on others' lives that depended not on partnership, but on quiet extraction. It sounds cruel, doesn't it? And yet, these parasites had no malice. They did what they must to survive, just as predators did, just as prey did. They adapted to a niche no one else claimed. A darker corner of life, but part of the whole. Sometimes in our own lives we meet what drains us, people, patterns, fears. But even that has meaning. It reveals what we must strengthen. Teaches us where we leak. Dear one, don't fear the shadows. They help define the light. And even in a world so new, even in the smallest creatures, there was balance even in the taking. Let that settle softly into your dreams. Cycles and cascades, feeding the chain. Every life feeds another. In the sunlit shallows of Silurian waters, tiny algae bloomed, soft, green threads, weaving light into food. They did not move, did not hunt, but they were the beginning. Grazers came next, simple invertebrates drifting or crawling, munching on the floating gardens. Then came the hunters, jawed fish, agile arthropods, and larger worms that chased or ambushed. Above them still, predators of predators, swift, toothy swimmers with growing brains and sharper senses. Each layer fed the next, and when one life ended, decomposers broke it down, releasing its nutrients back to the waters, to the soil, to the roots. Nothing was wasted. It was a circle, not a ladder. And maybe, dear one, your own life flows like this too. Giving, receiving, rising, resting. Sometimes above, sometimes below, but always connected. So if you feel small tonight, remember, even the plankton that drifts, invisible to the eye, feeds the grandest of creatures. You matter in ways you cannot always see. Fragile balance, stability through diversity. The Silurian world was not strong because it was still. It was strong because it moved with many rhythms at once. Dozens of species shared each stream. Coral reefs weren't made by one coral, but thousands of kinds, side by side. If one vanished, another could fill the space. That was stability, not perfection, but flexibility. Diversity became Earth's quiet defense. Insects scavenged what fish ignored. Small crustaceans hid in plants that others couldn't eat. Predators chose from many meals, so the fall of one prey did not break the chain. And this, perhaps, is a lesson for us too. Your life need not be one path, one role, one identity. You are allowed to shift to be many things. You are allowed to change without falling apart. The more kinds of strength you carry, the more storms you can survive. So rest easy tonight, not because you must be perfect, but because you are richly varied, like the Silurian Sea. The living net, everything is connected. Beneath the gentle waves of the Silurian Sea, something more than life was forming. Pattern, a net, a quiet architecture of connection. Fish stirred the waters that fed the algae. Algae made oxygen for worms burrowed deep in the sand. Those worms enriched the soil for early plants. The plants, in turn, gave shelter to insects who fed the fish again. It wasn't a chain. It was a circle, a net with no beginning and no end. Every tug in one corner rippled across the whole. And so it is, dear one, even now. The kindness you offer a stranger may return to you in 1,000 forms. The pain you carry may echo in someone else's silence. And the joy you plant, however small, can bloom where you least expect. Like the Silurian world, your life is not built alone. You are held in an invisible web of care, of cause and effect, of quiet exchanges. So tonight, let that comfort you. Close your eyes and feel the gentle threads around you. You belong to the great net of life. And in that belonging, you can rest. Part 6. The Silurian Legacy. From bare earth to the first forests, from invertebrates to jawed fish, the Silurian didn't just pass by, it left a permanent mark on the course of life. 1. Significance in evolutionary history. A greener world, the rise of vascular plants. During the Silurian, the land was still mostly bare. But at the edges of water, something gentle began to rise. The earliest plants had no roots or veins. They stayed low, close to damp soil. But then came a change, the birth of vascular tissue. Inside these plants, tiny tubes formed, able to carry water upward. For the first time, life could lift itself. They stood taller, grew leaves that reached the sun more fully, held water longer, cast shadows, changed the air around them. This wasn't just new biology. It was the beginning of forests, whispered in tiny steps. Sometimes, dear one, change begins inside, quietly. A shift no one sees but you. Yet it gives you strength to rise inch by inch. The plants of Silurian didn't know they were rewriting Earth's future. They just reached upward and became more. Let that be your comfort tonight. You too can rise slowly, and that is enough. From fins to power, the explosion of jawed fish. Beneath the still waters of the Silurian seas, something sharpened. Not just fins, but purpose. For millions of years, fish had swum without jaws. They filtered, grazed, or sucked in food. But now, evolution whispered a new idea. Teeth. A hinged jaw. A mouth that could bite, grip, crush. Changed everything. With jaws came choices. Fish could chase, ambush, or defend. Food became more than luck. It became strategy. And soon, the seas stirred with new forms. Placoderms, armored and bold. Acanthodians, sleek and quick. The underwater world had become a stage of movement and intent. Still, all this began from one shift. A change so small it almost went unnoticed. Dear listener, your strength may begin in silence too. One new ability, one quiet realization, can give shape to something bold. Just as jaws brought balance to ancient seas, your growth can open doors you didn't know were there. Even power can rise gently, like a ripple beneath the surface. Webs of life, complex ecosystems take shape. In the Silurian, life was no longer a simple line. It was a web woven from countless threads. Plants spread on land. Fish filled the waters. Insects began to stir near the shore. Each one touched another. No creature lived alone. Small grazers fed on algae. Jawed fish hunted the grazers. Dead matter fed the decomposers, who in turn fed the soil, which welcomed more plants. It was harmony through connection. Sometimes, dear one, your life might feel tangled, like too many threads to hold. But nature teaches us, complexity is strength. A single rope may snap, but a net can hold. You are part of a living web, and in that web, you are never truly alone. Foundations for forests, preparing for the Devonian. The Silurian didn't grow forests yet, but it laid the soil. Vascular plants dug their roots deeper. They trapped sediments, made soil rich with decaying leaves. Riverbanks stabilized. Moisture clung to shaded earth. When the Devonian came, trees could rise because Silurian plants had held the ground. Just like that, the quiet efforts of today become tomorrow's miracle. Maybe you're not building forests yet, dear heart. Maybe you're just softening the soil. But that too is a gift. That too is growth. Oxygen and opportunity changing Earth's breath. With every green leaf, oxygen filled the air. Photosynthesis, that silent miracle, turned sunlight into sugar and breath into possibility. As more plants spread, the sky slowly changed. Oxygen rose. Life could breathe deeper. Fish grew more active. The seas stirred with energy. You too may be changing the air around you. One gentle act, one kind thought, can shift the unseen atmosphere. Breathe deeply, dear one. You are part of a long exhale that began eons ago. A silent legacy, the gifts that remain. Most Silurian creatures are gone. Their bodies turned to stone. Their shapes faded. But their gifts remain. The soil they shaped, the oxygen they made, the balance they began. Evolution isn't always loud. Often, it is quiet, like a seed in the dark. Tonight, if you wonder whether you've done enough, remember them. Remember moss that softened stone. Remember fish that bit the first time. You don't have to be remembered to have mattered. Your life already leaves echoes, soft but lasting. And now rest. You are part of a history that still grows. 2 Silurian fossils. Under the quiet earth, the fragments of time still breathe. Silent memories, what fossils tell us. Beneath quiet layers of ancient earth, memories sleep. Fossils are not just bones or shells. They are whispers from another time. Creatures long gone left behind pieces of themselves. A tooth, a footprint, the curve of a coral. These remains turned to stone, sealed in time. In the Silurian, life was changing. Jawed fish swam with purpose. Corals built reefs. Tiny sea creatures scattered the ocean floor. They lived, died, and slowly became part of the rock beneath us. Fossils remind us that even the softest lives leave marks. That something does not need to be loud to be remembered. And you, dear one, like the ancient sea creature in the mud, are shaping the world in quiet ways. Even in stillness, you are becoming part of something lasting. So rest easy tonight. The earth remembers gently. The layers beneath, reading the strata. The earth holds time in layers, like pages in a book made of stone. In Silurian rock, each layer tells a story. Warm, shallow seas, rising and falling tides, storms buried in mud. Paleontologists read these layers like history. One band of limestone means calm. Another hints at sudden change. These layers are called strata, quiet records of years too ancient to count. Just like Earth, we carry layers too. Seasons of joy, of loss, of growth, each hidden beneath the next. Not all are visible. Not all are easy to explain. But every layer has meaning. So as you rest tonight, let the weight of your story feel sacred. You are deep and you are whole, even if some parts remain buried for now. Traces of transformation, from soft mud to solid memory. Most creatures don't fossilize. They vanish soft, silent, and forgotten. But a lucky few find shelter, buried in fine mud, pressed by layers above, touched by minerals that slowly turn them to stone. In the Silurian seas, tiny worms, fish, and coral fragments settled on the seafloor. Covered gently, they began their long transformation, from fleeting life to fossil, from movement to memory. It's a slow, quiet process, like healing, like becoming. You don't need to be seen now to last forever. Sometimes, it's in the stillest moments that something lasting begins. Rest gently tonight, knowing that the quiet work within you may one day shine like stone. Fossils as clocks, telling time through rock. Fossils are more than bones, they are clocks that never tick. By studying which fossils appear in which layers, scientists can tell how old the rock is. Each fossil marks a moment in deep time, a signal from a world long past. In the Silurian, trilobites, brachiopods, and early fish appear in clear order. Their presence helps geologists build timelines, track extinctions, and trace ancient oceans. In your life, too, there are fossils, events, or feelings that mark turning points. A moment of courage, a goodbye, a beginning. You may not see them clearly now, but one day you'll look back and know that's when everything shifted. Like fossils in stone, your memories hold the shape of your becoming. Echoes into the present, why they matter now. Fossils don't just teach us about the past, they help us navigate the present. The layers they live in guide oil exploration, water storage, and the search for minerals. Their patterns reveal how Earth's climate changed and hint at what may come. But more than that, fossils remind us nothing truly disappears. Even the smallest creature can echo through eternity. So tonight, let that truth soothe you. Your actions matter. Your moments matter. Even if no one sees them now, the earth has a way of remembering. And you, dear dreamer, are part of that memory. Sleep gently. You are ancient and new, small and infinite. 3. The Prelude to the Devonian. When one door of time closes, another quietly opens. A stage well set, life ready for expansion. By the close of the Silurian, the world had grown quieter. Not in silence, but in steadiness. The chaos of earlier ages had softened. Life had learned to root, to flow, to stay. Along the shores and in the shallow lakes, plants no longer just clung to the edge. They reached upward now, taller and steadier. They held the soil with quiet confidence. Their green hands touched the air, feeding not just themselves, but shaping the land around them. In the rivers, jawed fish glided with grace. Stronger, swifter, and more aware, they began to explore beyond their salty homes. The freshwater world, once still and simple, was becoming a theater of movement and purpose. Everything was changing gently, not with noise, but with readiness. Dear sleepy one, doesn't it feel familiar? That hush before a new beginning? That soft pause before life bursts forth? The stage was set. The actors were in place. And Devon, the age of fish, waited just beyond the curtain. Sleep now, knowing that in both ancient times and your own, stillness can be a sign of something beautiful about to begin. Waters of change, a climate becoming kinder. After the great freeze of the Ordovician, the earth began to breathe easier. Ice melted slowly, releasing the land from its grip. Sea levels rose, not in haste, but like a gentle tide returning to shore. Rainfall became more regular, no longer wild or cruel. Warmth touched the oceans and the coasts alike, allowing coral reefs to grow and fish to swim with greater freedom. This softening of the climate was no accident. It was part of a long and careful preparation. A new world needed gentler hands. Dear friend, sometimes, after long winters in our hearts, we forget how warmth feels, but it returns, slowly, steadily, and just like the earth, you too are allowed to thaw. The Silurian skies cleared, the winds quieted, and beneath it all, ecosystems grew more intricate, more connected. The earth was learning how to be kind again, not just to survive, but to flourish. Green architects, plants that shaped the future. The early land plants of the Silurian were not loud revolutionaries. They were quiet architects, reshaping the world leaf by leaf. With vascular tissues, they moved water and nutrients through their slender bodies. Roots grew deeper, anchoring them and holding soil in place. Some grew taller, forming the first hints of shade, softening the sun's touch. These plants changed the chemistry of the air, reducing carbon dioxide and increasing oxygen, a slow gift to all life that would follow. But perhaps their most powerful act was stillness. They stayed rooted in one place, building a stable world for others to come. Imagine that, sleepy listener. By standing still, they made room for movement. By growing slowly, they made space for change. We often rush to bloom, forgetting that simply being present is a kind of revolution. Thanks to these green pioneers, the land became a canvas, not just for plants, but for animals, for insects, for futures not yet dreamed. The earth was becoming more than a home. It was becoming a sanctuary. Jawed wanderers, fish on the brink of greatness. Beneath the warming waters, a new kind of swimmer had emerged, fish with jaws. Unlike their jawless cousins, these early pioneers could bite, grasp, and chew. They could hunt. They could choose. With streamlined bodies and sensing organs along their skin, they read the flow of the rivers, the whispers of prey. Some ventured into freshwater, adapting to calmer currents and muddier bottoms. Others remained in coastal seas, perfecting the art of ambush. They were not yet the kings of the sea, but they were learning. And evolution was watching. Each fin stroke was a rehearsal. Each bite, a step toward mastery. Sleepy one, greatness rarely comes in a single leap. Comes in countless, quiet tries. These early fish, small but determined, would one day fill the Devonian world with life of every shape and scale. For now, they were simply preparing, refining, becoming. In the still waters of the Silurian, the age of fish had already begun to shimmer. Silent sparks, triggers for diversification. Sometimes the greatest changes begin not with thunder, but with stillness. By the end of the Silurian, the Earth held a perfect balance. Oxygen in the air, nutrients in the soil, warm waters filled with algae and prey. There was room. There was energy. There was opportunity. It didn't take much. A mutation here, a new food source there. Suddenly, species diverged. Some became faster, others more armored, still others smaller but cleverer. Biodiversity began to blossom like a quiet fire under the surface, unseen by the sky but burning just the same. Dear dreamer, perhaps you felt it too. The quiet beginning of something big, hidden in the routines of your days. That spark inside you, glowing beneath the calm, is not small. It is life preparing to unfold. The Silurian was filled with these silent sparks, and Devon would be their bloom. The curtain rises, welcoming the Devonian. And so the curtain gently lifted. Silurian had built the stage. Plants rooted, waters warmed, creatures prepared. There was no grand ending, no fanfare, just readiness. The Devonian arrived not with noise, but with invitation. It opened the door to forests and fierce predators, to the first steps of animals onto land, to coral cities beneath the waves. Everything that Silurian had nurtured, the stillness, the balance, the quiet preparation, now found space to grow wild. And you, sweet listener, as you drift toward sleep, may feel this too, that life moves in waves, that stillness isn't the end, but the breath before the leap. Tonight, as your thoughts soften and your body rests, know that you are, like the earth once was, full of quiet promise. Sleep well. Devon awaits. The Silurian dream, a gentle chapter ends. The Silurian period, a name soft as mist, and a time just as gentle. After the harsh silence of the Ordovician extinction, Earth did not rush. It did not roar back to life. Instead, it breathed slow, deep, and quiet. Across its ancient face, the land began to soften. The seas grew calm. The sun returned with warmth, not fury. And slowly, ever so slowly, life began to write again. This time with quieter lines. Tiny green patches appeared first, like watercolor on stone. Mosses and early plants clung to bare rock, soaking up light and hope. They didn't shout, they didn't climb high, but they were the first to reach. In the shallows, coral reefs stretched like underwater lace, inviting color back into the sea. Jawed fish glided in gentle currents, learning how to bite, how to move, how to choose. And above it all, the earth turned not toward chaos, but toward balance. The Silurian was not a time of drama. It was a lullaby, a deep breath, calm between storms. Dear sleepy listener, isn't that how life often heals? Not with fireworks, but with quiet restoration. Not by racing ahead, but by finding rhythm again. This chapter has shown us that. It whispered that rebirth doesn't need to be loud. Taught us that stillness is sacred, that preparation is powerful. And maybe tonight you feel a little more like the earth did then, recovering, rooting, softening into your own gentle renewal. The Silurian story may close now, but it does so on the warmest of notes, with oceans richer, skies more stable, and life waiting in perfect patience for what comes next. So let yourself drift with it. Let the calm take you. You've walked through sunlight on moss. You've watched coral bloom in ancient seas. You've felt the quiet becoming of a world at peace. And now it's time to rest. Sleep deeply, dear traveler through time. You are safe in this ancient hush. May your dreams be soft as moss and steady as the sea. Roots, reefs, and rising fins, the evolutionary gifts of Silurian. Let's stay here just a little longer, in the soft silence of the Silurian, before the waves get wilder, before the forests grow taller. Let us sit beside the roots, the reefs, and the gliding fins, and remember what this chapter quietly gave. The first gift was roots. Not only the kind that sank into soil, but roots of stability, of stillness. These early vascular plants did something profound. They reached both upward and downward. Their tender green stems sought the sun, while their fine roots gripped the earth. Through them, the land began to hold itself together. Soil didn't wash away so easily. Ground stayed in place. And water, sweet and slow, could now be drawn from deep below. It was the beginning of all future forests. But more than that, it was the beginning of trust between land and life. The second gift came from the sea, reefs. In warm, shallow waters, coral reefs bloomed again. Not the same as before, but stronger, more intricate. They built walls of limestone, cradling whole ecosystems in their embrace. Tiny creatures darted among coral branches. New forms of life swirled through the currents. In these quiet underwater cities, biodiversity flourished. And as life grew more complex, so did relationships. Predator and prey, shelter and resident. The sea was learning connection. The third gift rose on silent fins, jawed fish. Until now, most animals fed passively. But jawed fish brought movement, choice, strategy. They could bite, hunt, and claim territory. Their jaws were a new kind of language, one that would echo through evolution for millions of years. These early vertebrates didn't rule the oceans yet, but they began to shape them. They were rehearsing for the future, for roles that would someday include walking on land and breathing open air. So you see, the Silurian didn't need to shout. Its gifts were subtle but enduring. Roots that grounded, reefs that sheltered, fins that moved with intent. And perhaps, dear dreamer, Your own life carries these gifts too. Maybe you are growing roots in unseen places. Maybe your inner reef is offering safety to something small and new. Maybe your fins, your courage, are ready to explore waters you've never swum before. Tonight, carry these quiet blessings with you. Let them settle gently in your mind. The Silurian gave us more than we often remember, and so have you in your own time of soft becoming. Now rest. The night holds you as gently as the sea held coral, and you are just as precious. A planet in balance, climate, and harmony. If you listen closely, you might still hear it. The slow, rhythmic breathing of a planet at peace. In the Silurian, Earth was learning something essential: how to balance. Not just life, but light and air, water and stone. The great glaciers of the Ordovician had melted. Their icy silence gave way to gentle warmth. The oceans rose, not in anger, but in invitation, filling low basins, softening coastlines, and welcoming new forms of life. For the first time in a long time, the Earth's fever had cooled. Its pulse settled into a calmer rhythm. The continents, once scattered, began to drift closer, not clashing, but embracing along quiet shores. New shallow seas cradled the edges of land. And it was here, in these margins, not in the deep, that life found its footing again. The climate was neither too hot nor too cold. The air was rich with just enough oxygen for change. And rain fell often enough to matter, but gently enough to nourish. It was, in many ways, a planetary exhale. Dear sleepy soul, perhaps you've been through winters of your own. Perhaps your mind has wandered through icy places, unsure when the thaw would come. But just like the earth, healing begins in warmth, not in sudden heat, but in a slow returning. In this chapter, Earth teaches us that true growth needs rest first, that harmony is not found in extremes, but in the quiet middle, that we don't always need to fight. Sometimes we simply need to breathe. And while the world didn't look like ours just yet, its heartbeat began to resemble our own. The air carried the scent of moss and salt. The wind hummed through valleys that had never known trees. And the oceans, filled with gentle stirrings, whispered life back into being. This balance, this delicate dance, would become the stage for all that followed. The Devonian forests, the amphibians, the insects that would buzz beneath leaves. But it all began here, with calmness, with cooperation, with climate at rest. So tonight, take a deep breath just like Earth did then. You are not behind. You are not lost. You are finding your own rhythm again. You are warming after a long cold. You are, like the Silurian world, returning to balance. Sleep well, dear one. The winds of this ancient harmony still blow gently around you. Opening the Devonian door, what comes next? The Silurian story, dear one, does not end. It simply changes rhythm, like a dream that shifts into another, like a stream that becomes a river. At the close of this chapter, the earth was not empty, but ready, not silent, but listening, not finished, but full of promise. The seas had calmed and cradled new life. The land had softened, inviting roots to stay. The skies had learned to hold warmth without fire. And from that gentle preparation, a bold future would rise. Just beyond this quiet shore lies the Devonian, a time of forests, of fierce fish, of the first steps onto land. Here, vertebrates would begin their greatest adventure, learning to walk. Lush green would rise where once there was only stone. Jaws would grow sharper, bodies more agile, and ecosystems more complex. The Devonian will be louder. It will teem with movement, tension, transformation. It will be the age of fishes, but also the first breath of air from creatures who dared to lift their heads above the tide. But none of that could have happened without the patience of the Silurian. You see, dear sleepy traveler, even bold beginnings need soft foundations. You too may be on the edge of change. A new chapter, a new self, a new way of moving through your days. But don't worry if you're not rushing. Don't worry if your roots are still growing quietly in the dark. Remember the Silurian. It waited, it healed, it whispered life into stillness. So when you hear the call of what's next, when you feel the stirrings of your own Devonian, step forward softly. There is no need to run. You have time. You are ready. And the earth is walking with you. Let the story unfold. Let your dreams open that next door. And as you drift off tonight, may your heart carry the calm of coral reefs, the strength of early roots, and the quiet courage of the first-finned explorers. Sleep well, my friend. The Devonian waits, but not without you. Good night from the Silurian. Now, my dear sleepy history friend, you've made it to the end of another chapter in Earth's long, long dream. From the first moss that clung gently to the rocks, to the forests that breathed moisture into the air, from fish learning to hunt in freshwater streams, to continents quietly folding themselves into new shapes, the Silurian was not loud. It did not rush. It did not demand to be remembered. And yet, it gave the world something precious: patience, balance, preparation. Tonight, let those gifts sink into you too. Let the hush of this ancient time wrap itself around your shoulders, like a soft blanket spun from moonlight and mist. There is no need to do anything now. No more thinking, no more trying. Just breathe. Your chest rises and falls, like the quiet tides that once kissed the coral reefs of Silurian seas. Your body, so gently heavy now, like the continents resting against each other, still and sure. Maybe today you felt hurried. Maybe you were worried or tired or stretched too thin. Maybe your heart whispered questions you didn't have time to answer. That's okay. The earth too had long pauses, moments of stillness, eras where nothing seemed to change. Yet deep beneath the surface, everything was preparing. You are allowed to pause too. You do not need to bloom tonight. You do not need to shine. You are already part of something ancient and good, like the moss that held the soil together, like the tiny roots that found water in the dark, like the stars above quietly watching. You are doing enough simply by being here, breathing, listening, resting. Let go of the day now. Let the voices of pressure and urgency melt away. Let the thoughts that tug at your mind soften into silence. There is nothing you need to fix, nothing you need to become. You are enough, and you are safe. You are held by this moment, by the deep time of the earth, and the quiet wisdom of all that came before you. Close your eyes, dear one. Let the Silurian lull you, like the hush of warm rain on ancient stones. Let it remind you, you do not need to move mountains to matter. Sometimes just being still is its own kind of miracle. In this breath, you are a river finding its course. In this moment, you are a forest seed, dreaming beneath the soil. There will be mornings ahead. There will be light. But for now, the night is enough. And if your thoughts return, if they wander or pull, just come back to this. Your breath, slow and soft, like waves returning home. Feel how your bed holds you. Feel how the night cradles you. Feel how deeply you are allowed to rest. You are not alone. Not tonight. Not ever. because here with Sleepy History, you are always welcome, always safe. So sleep now, sweet soul. Let the earth keep watch over your dreams. Let the Silurian whisper to you in the language of stillness and stone. And when you wake, you'll carry with you the quiet strength of ancient oceans and the deep peace of time that knows no hurry. Sleep gently, sleep deeply, sleep well. From all of us at Sleepy History, good night, and we'll meet you in the Devonian.